What distinguishes Broadcasting Scotland from a website or blog, apart from our brilliant programmes?
Hi there, I'm Gordon Ross.
Are the costs we face to enable us to produce those programmes. These costs are significant and ongoing. However, our facilities are able to do so much more if only we had the staff. In the last year, some of our supporters have cancelled their subscriptions. In one way, we would prefer it if it was because they didn't like us, rather than it being because of the financial pressures which we are all under because of COVID. The really positive outcome of our fundraiser is that at a time of economic challenge in Scotland, we will use your donations to create jobs and in a small way contribute to improving the Scottish economy. If you want us to be Scotland's independent broadcaster, able to provide an alternative mainstream television platform, then please support us.
Scotland is going to be an independent country.
Just imagine what we could do if we had even 1% of the BBC Scotland channel's budget. Imagine. And then please consider turning your imagination into reality. Please support us if you can afford it.
The proceeding will start shortly.
To order, we start with questions to the Minister for Women and Equalities, Carol Monaghan.
Number one, please, Mr. Speaker.
Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, with your permission, I will take questions 1 and 13 together. As part of our strategies to tackle violence against women and girls, we have committed to strengthen protections against sexual harassment in the workplace. This includes taking forward 2 legislative measures as part of the Worker Protection Bill led by the Member for Bath. Furthermore, in our landmark Inclusive Britain strategy, we committed to publishing guidance on ethnicity pay reporting for employers. This guidance will soon be published and will support employers in identifying and tackling unfair pay gaps in their workforces.
Carol Monaghan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. New data published by the MOD earlier this month showed that in the year to September 2022, more women left the armed forces than joined the armed forces. Now, given the string of sexual abuse and harassment allegations that we've heard, this data is concerning but hardly surprising. So what is the Minister doing to ensure women are safe in the armed forces and indeed that this pervasive attitude of misogyny in the armed forces has been tackled?
I thank the Honourable Lady for her question, which she is right to raise. It is a very serious issue, and I know that my colleagues in the Ministry of Defence take it very seriously indeed. I know that they do have a strategy and a plan to tackle this, but as I mentioned, with the sexual harassment in the workplace, we have many measures to look into what is going on. We are concerned about women leaving the workplace, and this government will do everything it can to make sure that women are encouraged to stay and thrive in their workplaces.
C. MacDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Scottish Government is encouraging employers to report on ethnicity pay gaps, and that's a policy, of course, supported by the Women and Equalities Committee. But the Scottish Government can't enforce that policy as it doesn't have the powers. Would she be willing to have a conversation about the transfer of those powers so that we can all learn the lessons from the results?
I thank the Honourable Gentleman for his question. We have no plans to devolve equal opportunities policy, but what I would say is that there is actually quite a lot of work being done on ethnicity pay reporting. It should not be made mandatory. It is very, very different from gender pay gap reporting because it covers more than 2 separate categories. I'm very happy to write to him with more detail about the work that we're doing, but we will be publishing guidance for those companies that do want to carry out ethnicity pay reporting in due course.
To the committee, Caroline.
Mr. Speaker, gendered abuse, harassment and bullying in the workplace is wrong, but it can happen anywhere. And does my right honourable friend agree with me that when it happens here, when there is gendered abuse and bullying and indeed intimidation, in this chamber, we should make sure action is taken to stamp it out.
Secretary.
I completely agree with my right honourable friend. This is a very serious issue, and we are all aware of allegations that have been made against members in this House. We know, and Mr. Speaker, I know this is an issue that you care very much about, that this is one of the places where we have freedom of speech and freedom of expression. We condemn any members who try to intimidate, harass or abuse other members of Parliament when they're simply representing their constituents.
Manchester.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With regards to racial inequality and discrimination, the previous Home Office report looked at two areas and the stats with regards to hate crime on Islamophobia and also anti-Semitism. Both of those stats and figures were absolutely appalling, with a high number of those incidents. I asked the Minister this. The government previously removed the independent advisor on Islamophobia, Kari Yasin. He apparently did not have any terms of reference for 2 years. With regards to the government's commitment on tackling Islamophobia and intolerance, what is the government's strategy on that?
I thank my honourable friend for the question. The government does have a strategy to tackle anti-Muslim hatred, and I would recommend that he raise this with the Secretary of State for Levelling Up Housing and Communities. He is responsible for that portfolio specifically as part of the community's strategy. Thank you.
SNP spokesperson Kirsten Oswald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This week, the UK Government rejected outright 5 of the Women and Equalities Select Committee's recommendations on menopause and the workplace, and it's not actually committing to any new work in response to the report. The chair of the committee, the Right Honourable Member for Romsey and Southampton North, has described the government's progress as glacial and its response as complacent, pointing out it's a missed opportunity to protect vast numbers of talented and experienced women from leaving the workforce. So will the Minister change tack, and will she commit to finally acting on menopause and the workplace? And if she won't, will she commit to looking again at why devolving employment law to Scotland matters so much, so that we can do that work?
Mr. Speaker, what I would do is ask the Honourable Lady to read the Women's Health Strategy, and she will see that the menopause is a priority area within the Women's Health Strategy. What I would say is that the Select Committee has made recommendations which we have considered carefully, but there is no point in the government having a strategy if it's simply going to accept recommendations from elsewhere that don't conform to that. I think that the best thing would be for her to actually work with the government and to look at the good work that we're doing on tackling issues around menopause.
Emma Hardy.
Question number 2. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Tackling NHS waiting lists, including for gynaecology, is a priority for the government, which is why we're spending £8 billion on clearing our backlog, and why for gynae procedures specifically, the 90 surgical hubs which have opened, the 90 community diagnostic centres and the women's health hubs will all go to tackling gynaecology backlogs.
Emma Hardy.
Thank you, and I thank the Minister for her answer. Some vaginal mesh injured women have been left waiting 4 years for mesh removal, and I've highlighted before these women's concerns that the surgeons that they go to for mesh removal are only actually trained in implanting the mesh and not removing the mesh. These women fear that once again they're being used as test subjects. So when will mesh-injured women get the redress that was recommended by the Baroness Cumberledge's review, First Do No Harm?
Minister.
Well, I thank the Honourable Lady for her work in this space, and I recognise that while we've set up 9 specialist mesh centres to tackle mesh removal, and we have seen a number of women come forward and receive their surgery, there are still a number on the waiting list. I'm meeting with some of the campaigners next week on mesh removal. We were at the Select Committee hearing just a few weeks ago, and I heard some of their concerns. So I recognise there's still more progress to make in this space.
We now come to Shadow Secretary on these stories.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. NHS England figures show that in October 2012, 15 women had been waiting over a year for gynaecological treatment. Can the Minister tell the House how many women had been waiting for that long in October last year?
Minister.
Well, as the Shadow Minister will know, there's a backlog of procedures in all 4 devolved nations of the United Kingdom for clinical reasons rather than political reasons. We have made huge progress in clearing the 2-year backlog, with the majority of those patients now having had their treatments. We're on track to meet the 18-month target in April, and will then be focusing on those who are waiting for a year.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I regret that the Minister did not directly answer my question, perhaps because she is aware of the appalling scale of that backlog. 38,000 women as of October last year, had been waiting over a year for treatment. That's 2,500 times more than 10 years ago. On top of that, now less than half of women are up to date with cervical screening in some areas. Do women suffering in pain now just have to accept long waiting times and low screening rates under the Conservatives?
Minister.
Well, isn't it sad that this is turning into a political football when there are clinical reasons why backlogs have accumulated over the 2 years? Perhaps the Shadow Minister will want to look at Wales, where Labour have been in charge for 20 years and where their performance is worse than in England.
Temi.
Number 3, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Embrace report does show that women from Black, Asian and mixed ethnic groups do have worse outcomes when it comes to maternity outcomes, and that is why NHSE have published the Equity and Equality Guidelines for local maternity services, supported by £6.8 million worth of investment to focus on actions to reduce these disparities.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last year, the government's own maternity task force pleaded with the government to provide better maternity care for migrant women. But yet, still 8 in 10 refugee and migrant women are still waiting more than 10 weeks to get their first antenatal care. And that is compounded by the fact that black women are still 4 times more likely to die in this country from childbirth. So, can the Minister let us know when the task force will finish their inquiry and when the government will start delivering better maternity care for women in this country?
Well, I thank the Honourable Lady for highlighting the work of the Maternity Disparities Task Force, which this government set up. I have been working with the co-chair, Professor Jacqueline Dunkley-Bent. Our next meeting is going to be focusing on some of the actions to tackle this. But I would encourage all members to, as from October last year, each local area produced their local maternity, equity and equality action plans, targeting specific communities within those areas to try and improve those outcomes. I would encourage all members to look at their local action plans, and if they have concerns that they won't meet those needs, please do come and see me. I'm very happy to work with members on this.
That's it.
Number 4, please, Mr. Speaker.
Secretary.
With your permission, Mr. Speaker, I'll take questions 4 and 15 together. It was the Conservative government that introduced gender pay gap reporting in 2017, motivating employers to look at their pay data and improve workplace gender equality. And to accelerate progress, we are supporting legislation that enhances flexible working, extends redundancy protection for those on maternity leave. We're introducing carers leave, and we're strengthening the protections against harassment in the workplace.
Mr. Speaker, the gender pay gap amongst full-time employees was 8.3% in April 2022. That's sadly up from 7.7% in the previous year. Worse still, Labour analysis has uncovered that amongst black African women, the gender pay gap is an appalling 26% compared with the average male worker, and for Bangladeshi and Pakistani women, the figures are 28 and 31% respectively. So rather than just watch as the situation deteriorates, what urgent steps is the government taking to deal with these dreadful disparities?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't recognise any of the statistics that the Honourable Gentleman has raised. And with all due respect, I have seen all sorts of Labour analysis that misuses and abuses statistics to the point where we honestly can't take them seriously. If he does have evidence, real evidence, where he has identified things, I'm very, very keen for him to send it to the Equality Hub and we can analyse. But those figures do not represent anything that we have found across government.
Mr. Speaker, closing the gender pay gap would add £600 million to the UK's economy by 2025. Labour has a plan to do this by requiring large firms to publish gender pay gap plans, permitting equal pay comparisons and extending statutory maternity and paternity leave and strengthening protections for pregnant women. Will the government finally accept our proposals?
I'm afraid the government will not accept those proposals. Even the statement she's made where we're conflating equal pay and gender pay gap reporting, they're not the same thing. This is one of the areas that has quite a lot of nuance, and what I would say is that Labour needs to do a little bit more of its own homework.
Walker.
Would my right honourable friend agree one of the most effective ways we can close the gender pay gap is to support women returning to work after pregnancy? And would she agree, therefore, to use her good offices to encourage cross-government work to improve the affordability and availability of childcare for new mothers?
I thank my right honourable friend for his question. I think this is something that we can agree on all sides of the House does need more support and more work. Childcare is one of the reasons why women do leave the workplace, and we're doing everything we can to support women to ensure that they have appropriate childcare arrangements in place.
Chloe Smith.
Question 5, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Firstly, I'd like to thank my right honourable friend for bringing forward this Act and the important work she did in delivering it. And I'm assured that work continues across government to ensure departments named in the schedule of the Act are aware of their reporting duty. They will report on their use of BSL in their public communications at the end of the first reporting period, which is the 28th of June this year.
Chloe Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome that update. Will the advisory board also be on track ahead of that first statutory reporting timetable? And when will the statutory guidance be commenced? And furthermore, will my honourable friend the Minister commit that major public broadcasts by the government will be fully accessible?
Well, the Honourable Lady will be very pleased to know, my friend, that the first meeting of the departments who drive the Act forward is due to take place in mid-February. It's vital that the 20 departments listed on the schedule deliver the commitments, and the board will be the first dual-language one advising Her Majesty's government, demonstrating our commitment to the deaf community, and will form the vital guidance in the Act. And it will also rightly look at the major public broadcasts which my constituents and many of our constituents want to see and have asked for.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What discussions has the Minister had with our colleagues in the Government Communications Service about ensuring that BSL interpretation is provided for government announcements and media events, and the importance of not relying on written documents as an adjustment for deaf people?
Minister.
Yes, I thank the Honourable Lady for her interest. The British Sign Language Advisory Board, as I say, is being established to advise the government on that implementation. And amongst those people giving advice will be BSL signers. And the majority of the members of those deaf BSL users will have lived experience. And the point will be that they want those government communications to be accessible. I'm very proud at DWP we do have that accessibility in our job centres, and this needs to be for major government announcements as well.
Catherine West.
Please.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the government is committed to a sustainable long-term approach to tackling poverty and supporting families on lower incomes. To help people progress, the DWP provides a range of support for anyone at any age or career stage and background to move forward and be better off. As well as one-to-one support with their work coach, job seekers can access sector-based work academies, the Restart programme and the Work and Health programme.
Catherine West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Jesuit said, "Give me a child until he is 7 and I'll give you the man," meaning the impact in the under 7 years that we put into helping children will create a more just future. What urgent action will the government take to address deep poverty affecting 46% of black and minority families? Is there extra funding that can be given to schools and into our teaching to support the under 7-year-olds from black and minority ethnic communities?
Minister.
Well, I thank the Honourable Lady for her point, and I think as an award-winning MP for focusing on disadvantaged groups, it's no doubt that she has interest in this area. The ethnic minority employment rate is at a record high, 70%, and we know that work is the best route out of poverty, and mentoring and support and being able to see those role models is absolutely key. And I can commit to continue to work across government with those disadvantaged groups to make sure that focus, as she says, is rightly there.
Minister Yasmin Qureshi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My honourable friend, the member for Hornsey, asked about deep poverty and minority children, so I'll ask the question again. Black, Asian and minority ethnic households are twice as likely to be in deep poverty and struggling to afford everyday basics such as food and energy. That's 46% of ethnic minority children living below the breadline. Is the Minister proud of her government's record, and will she answer the question that was put by my honourable member for Wood Green and Hornsey?
Well, I do refer the Honourable Lady to my previous answer, and we do know that work is the best route out of poverty and tackling those deep-rooted disadvantages. I recently joined a number 10 roundtable in terms of mentoring and support pipeline and helping people to understand what is holding people back. No one should be left behind because of their postcode and their background, and mentoring circles at DWP can make a real difference, particularly to young people who are looking to progress from that deep disadvantage.
Mr. Gibson.
Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Back again, Mr. Speaker. The primary causes of the gender pensions gap is due to the historic inequality of the labour market. This includes differences in working patterns and earnings for men and women. Now, this government has taken key steps such as the introduction of shared parental leave, mandatory gender pay gap reporting, and an effort, as we have heard already today, to tackle the root causes of this problem for women. And I know my honourable friend, the member for Sevenoaks, the Pensions Minister, is looking directly at this issue for women as well.
Tricia Gibson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's bad enough that women born in the 1950s were robbed of their pensions. But more generally, the gender pension gap is significantly larger than the gender pay gap and applies to a significantly large proportion of women in the UK, with retired women more likely to be poorer and more likely to rely on pension credit, a problem that persists. Will the Minister urgently address this issue, or, like the injustice suffered by WASPy women, will her government just ignore women being poorer in retirement?
Well, I can assure the Honourable Lady we simply will not be doing that. We monitor the pension contributions and participation by gender and publish data regularly through our Workplace Participation and Saving Trends publication. And what I would say, our funding of returners programmes are key to this as well, in terms of supporting those, as she rightly says, who've taken time out from the labour market for caring responsibilities. And finally, pension sharing on divorce is an option that can help women, as she says, if marriage or civil partnership has broken down. But as I say, it is a focus for us all.
Go to topicals, Cat Smith.
Mr. Speaker, question number 1, thank you.
Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, the government will publish a draft bill setting out our approach to banning conversion practices. This will go for pre-legislative scrutiny in this parliamentary session. We are committed to protecting everyone at risk of these practices from harm, and we are clear that the legislation must not affect the ability of parents, teachers or counsellors to have open, exploratory and even challenging conversations with young people.
Cat Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I ask the Secretary of State if she's had sight of the Health Select Committee's report into the Independent Medicines and Medical Devices review, and whether or not, particularly on point 53, what conversations she might be having with Treasury colleagues to support women seeking redress?
Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the Health and Social Care Committee for their IMMDS follow-up report, and our sympathies remain with all those women who've been affected by sodium valproate. Patient safety is our top priority, and we're committed to improving how the system listens to people, which is why I've asked the Patient Safety Commissioner, Dr. Henrietta Hughes, to look into redress schemes. So I'm not committing to any specific next steps today, but the Minister for Women will provide an update in due course.
Bob Blackman.
Mr. Speaker, does my honourable friend agree? Cheers from the other side. Does my honourable... Doesn't happen very often. Does my honourable friend agree with me that whether you live in Land's End or John O'Groats, it's important for every citizen to know their rights, and those rights to be implemented on a clear and consistent basis so no one is discriminated against?
Minister.
My honourable friend is absolutely right, and the United Kingdom has some of the strongest equality legislation in the world, and rightly so, and we continue to ensure that all of those rights are protected. Under the Equality Act, any person who is subject to discrimination can personally take their case to court to seek a remedy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Despite
Despite the 11th hour response to my letter about HRT repayment certificates arriving in my inbox just an hour ago, there still appears to be some ambiguity about what the certificate will cover. In her letter, the Minister says the changes to the drug tariff are being finalised to add eligible items, but no indication as to whether this will cover all HRT products. So for the benefit of women across the country, and as a matter of urgency, could the Minister please provide a comprehensive list of which products?
Well, can I thank the Honourable Lady for her work in this space? I did respond to her letter last week as quickly as possible, and I'm glad she's received the response. I just want to confirm that from April, the HRT prepayment certificate will be available to women, £18.70 for a whole year, saving women hundreds of pounds on HRT prescriptions every year.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am pleased that the government is reinstating protection against third-party harassment in the workplace. But employers are frequently confused when they're confronted with conflicting views on sex and gender. Can my right honourable friend confirm that the Equality and Human Rights Commission will be publishing detailed guidance to explain how employers should be treating protected beliefs on sex-based rights?
Secretary.
I thank my honourable friend for that question. The government will be supporting the Equality and Human Rights Commission in developing a statutory code on workplace harassment. We'll be working closely on this. And the government is also preparing its own practical guidance for employers on preventing sexual harassment in the workplace, which should address the very issues which she's just raised.
Clive Efford.
Mr. Speaker, Citizens Advice report published in the last 2 weeks shows that 600,000 households were moved to prepayment meters. There are bound to be many people who are vulnerable and disabled who have been moved onto those prepayment meters in that time. Can she say what she's been doing to ensure that practice ceases and to protect those people in the future?
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for raising that issue, and I believe it's going to be discussed further between the Department for Bays and also with the support that we give at DWP. I'm very proud to be bringing forward the next stage of the Household Support Fund and the cost of living payments. And I would say to anybody who is concerned about making payments, contact their energy supplier, use the benefits calculator on .gov.uk, and also make sure they look at the support for the cost of living household support fund through their local authority.
Little Richards.
I agree for reported to be committing by the UN and others atrocities atrocities including rape against women and girls in Ukraine on behalf of their Russian paymasters. So will the Secretary of State raise this with Cabinet colleagues and urge the government to prescribe the group as a terrorist organisation?
Mr. Speaker, the UK condemns Russia's use of Russian state proxies such as the Wagner Group in Ukraine and globally. And while the mercenaries operating in Ukraine in support of the Russian invasion, present in other conflict settings, including Mali and the Central African Republic, are continuing to bring us huge challenges. We are continuing to work with the Ukrainian government on tackling conflict-related sexual violence, including through UK expertise to support the investigations through the Atrocity Crimes Advisory Group, and we will not stop to provide that support.
Final question, Rushanara Ali.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The average cost of a full-time nursery place for a child under 2 when there's no government support costs around £14,000 a year, and much more in London. Can the Minister now get her government to put in the investment that's needed to fix the broken childcare system so that more mothers can return to work, particularly those who are single parents who struggle to return to work because of the lack of affordable childcare?
Secretary.
I thank the Honourable Lady for her question. This is, as I mentioned earlier, an issue that the government is working very, very hard on. And what I will do is raise this with my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Education, who can write to her and address those concerns more fully.
Before we come to Prime Minister's questions, I'd like to point out that the British Sign Language interpretation of proceedings is available to watch on Parliament Live TV. We start with questions to Prime Minister Margaret Farrier.
Question number 1, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, can I start by wishing everyone a happy Burns night, especially to those celebrating in Scotland. And, Mr. Speaker, as we prepare to mark Holocaust Memorial Day, I'm sure the whole House will join me in paying tribute to the extraordinary courage of Britain's Holocaust survivors, including 94-year-old Arik Hirsch, who is with us here today. This government will legislate to build the Holocaust Memorial and Learning Centre next to Parliament, so the testimonies of survivors like Arik will be heard at the heart of our democracy by every generation to come. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Shockingly, 1 in 6 women in the UK have experienced economic abuse. This is not just about money, but the restricting of access to other resources like food, housing or work. It's the lesser-known aspects of coercive control. It affects my constituents, the Prime Minister's constituents, and every member across this House. What plans does the Prime Minister have to review in detail government departments and policies, the way that government departments and policies can be exploited by abusers to ensure that these loopholes can be closed?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Lady raises an important point, and let me assure her that this government is committed to tackling violence against women and girls. That's why we passed the landmark Domestic Abuse Bill, introduced new offences, for example, coercion, coercive control, stalking and others, and will continue to do everything we can to ensure women and girls feel as safe as they deserve and rightly should be.
Marco Longi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. While I was disappointed that Dudley did not make the final cut in the latest Levelling Up funding round, I am, of course, pleased that we received the £25 million Towns deal, the brand new Duncan Edwards leisure facility, and a transport interchange project secured since my election in 2019. But our high street, Mr. Speaker, is on its knees. So will the Prime Minister meet with me and Dudley Council to discuss our levelling up bid and how we can ensure success in the next round?
Well, Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is a great advocate for his constituents. And I'm delighted that, thanks to his efforts, Dudley has received £25 million from the Towns Fund. I know there will be disappointment about the Levelling Up Fund, but all bids, including that made by Dudley Council, can receive feedback to strengthen their bid for future rounds of funding, and I would be very happy to meet him further to discuss.
We now come to the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This week we will remember the 6 million Jews murdered in the Holocaust and all those scarred by genocide since, as we mark Holocaust Memorial Day. We must all commit across this House to defeat prejudice and hatred wherever we may find it. To work for a better future, we must find light in the darkness. I can also join the Prime Minister in wishing everyone a happy Burns night. Mr. Speaker, Zara Alina was walking home from a night out with her friends when she was savagely attacked, assaulted and beaten to death. Zara was a brilliant young woman, a trainee lawyer with a bright future. Her killer is a violent, racist, woman-hating thug, not fit to walk the same streets. No. But that's precisely the problem. He was free to walk the same streets. Yeah. The Inspectorate report into her case says that opportunities were missed by the probation service that could have prevented this attack and saved her life. Does the Prime Minister accept those findings?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, this was a truly terrible crime. And as the Chief Inspector has found, the failings in this case, and indeed others, were serious and indeed unacceptable. In both of the cases that are in the public domain, these failures can be traced to failings in the initial risk assessment, and that's why immediate steps are being taken to address the serious issues raised.
Keir Starmer.
I'm glad he accepts those findings. The report also says that staffing vacancies and excessive workloads contributed to those fatal failures. And it makes absolutely clear this was not a one-off. as the report says, these are systemic issues in the probation service. They're clearly ministerial responsibilities. Does the Prime Minister accept those findings as well?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, let me outline for the honourable gentleman exactly what steps we are taking, and that's to ensure that mandatory training to improve risk assessments is being put in place. It's mandating checks with the police and children's services before a probation officer can recommend to the court that a convicted offender be given electronically monitored offence, and implementing new processes to guarantee the swift recall of offenders. And the action we are taking is already making a difference, as, for example, we see in the reduction of the number of electronically monitored curfews being given by the courts.
Yes, Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, it was Barking, Dagenham and Havering that tragically and fatally let Zara down. But across the country, probation services are failing. After a botched, then reversed privatisation, after a decade of underinvestment, it's yet another vital public service on its knees after 13 years of Tory government. I spoke to Zara's family this morning. It's hard to convey to this House the agony that they've been through. They say that the government has blood on their hands over these failings. He's accepted the findings of the report. Does he also accept what Zara's family say?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, my heart, of course, goes out to Zara's family. He mentioned accountability. The probation services has taken action where failings have been found and where that has been appropriate. And with regard to the overall service, because of the extra investment we're putting in, there's now £155 million a year being put into the probation service so that we can deliver better supervision of offenders. There's also been an increase in the number of senior probation officers. But one of the other things we must remember, Mr. Speaker, if we do want to increase the safety of women and girls out on our streets, that we need tough sentencing. And that's why this government passed the Police Crime and Sentencing Act, which the honourable gentleman opposite and his party opposed.
In light of the case of Zara, I really don't think the Prime Minister should be boasting about the protection that he's putting in place for women. And I'm not going to take lectures from him about that. Does the Prime Minister agree that any politician who seeks to avoid the taxes they owe in this country is not fit to be in charge of taxpayer money?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to make my position on this matter completely clear to the House. The issues in question occurred before I was Prime Minister. With regard to the appointment of the Minister without portfolio, the usual appointments process was followed. No issues were raised with me when he was appointed to his current role. And since I commented on this matter last week, more information has come forward. And that is why I have asked the independent adviser to look into the matter. Now, I obviously can't prejudge the outcome of that, but it is right that we fully investigate this matter and establish all the facts.
Mr. Speaker, he avoided the question. I think anybody watching would think it's fairly obvious that someone who seeks to avoid tax can't also be in charge of tax. Yet, for some reason, the Prime Minister can't bring himself to say that or even acknowledge the question. Now, last week, the Prime Minister told this House that the chair of the Tory party had addressed his tax affairs in full and there was nothing to add. This week, after days of public pressure, the Prime Minister now says there are serious questions to answer. What changed?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I know he reads from these prepared sheets, but he should listen to what I actually say. Since I commented on this matter last week, more information, including a statement including a statement by the Minister without portfolio, has entered the public domain, which is why it's right that we do establish the facts. And Mr. Speaker, let me take a step back. Now, of course, the politically expedient thing to do would be for me to have said that this matter must have been resolved by Wednesday at noon. But I believe in proper due process. That's why I appointed an independent advisor, and that's why the independent advisor is doing his job. But the opposition can't have it both ways. The shadow leader, his party chair, both urged me and the government to appoint an independent advisor. And now he objects to that independent advisor doing their job. It's simple political opportunism, and everyone can see through it.
Yes, Farmer.
We all know why the Prime Minister was reluctant to ask his party chair questions about family finances and tax avoidance. But his failure to sack him when the whole country can see what's going on shows how hopelessly weak he is. A Prime Minister overseeing chaos, overwhelmed at every turn. He can't say when ambulances will get to heart attack victims again. He can't say when the prison system will keep streets safe again. He can't even deal with tax avoiders in his own cabinet. Is he starting to wonder if this job is just too big for him?
Mr. Speaker, the difference between him and me is that I stand by my values and my principles even when it is difficult. When I disagreed fundamentally with the previous Prime Minister, I resigned from the government. But for four long years, he sat next to the member for Islington North. When anti-Semitism ran rife, when his predecessor sided with our opponents. That's what's weak, Mr. Speaker. He has no principles and just petty politics.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. For our most vulnerable children, school is often their principal place of safety as well as education. But as reported in my review of school exclusions for the government in 2019, the unacceptable and illegal use of off-rolling is still shutting a worrying number of children out of the classroom, out of learning, and out of the protection they need from gangs, violence and domestic abuse. And whilst there has been some impressive and excellent work done by the Department of Education to address this terrible practice, what more can my right honourable friend do to ensure that we now permanently exclude off-rolling from our schools?
Prime Minister.
Well, my honourable friend raises an important issue, and the government is clear that off-rolling is unlawful and unacceptable in any form. And the Department for Education continues to work with Ofsted to tackle it. Where Ofsted finds it, it will always be addressed in the inspection report, and it could also lead to a school's leadership being judged inadequate.
We now come to the Leader of the SNP, Stephen Flew.
Mr. Speaker, let me start by echoing the sentiments of the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition in relation to Holocaust Memorial Day. Truly horrific crimes that we must never forget and endeavour to ensure are never repeated. May I also send my heartfelt thoughts, and indeed I hope those of all across the Chamber, to the firefighter who's in serious condition in Edinburgh at this moment in time following the blaze in Edinburgh just a few days ago. Mr. Speaker, may I ask the Prime Minister, what advice would he have for individuals seeking to protect their personal finances? Should they seek out a future chair of the BBC to help secure an £800,000 loan? Should they set up a trust in Gibraltar and hope that HMRC simply don't notice? Or should they do as others have done and simply apply for non-dom status?
Prime
Mr. Speaker, let me share with the honourable gentleman expressing my sympathies to the families and indeed the firefighter who's currently in hospital. I'm sorry to hear that and wish him a speedy recovery. Mr. Speaker, I'm proud of the record of this government is supporting the most vulnerable in our society. Just this winter, helping all families £900 with their energy bills, raising the national living wage to record levels and ensuring that our pensioners get the support they need. That's what this government is doing to ensure financial security in this country.
I'm not sure what question the Prime Minister thought I asked, but that certainly was not it, Mr. Speaker. But let's be clear about this. This is now a matter of the Prime Minister's own integrity and accountability. After all, when there was questions about the Home Secretary, the Secretary, and concerns about her role in relation to national security, he chose to back her. Now the Chair of the Tory Party, he's choosing to back him despite a £5 million penalty from HMRC. And of course, he's seeking to protect the former Prime Minister despite his cosy financial relationship with the chair of the BBC. Is it little wonder that people in Scotland may well just consider the Tory party to be a parcel of rogues?
Mr. Speaker, what I'm standing up for is proper due process. That's why we have an independent advisor. It's right that the independent advisor conducts his investigation. That's how we will ensure accountability, and that's what I will deliver.
Rob Roberts.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Wales has almost 40 times more people than England waiting more than 2 years for NHS treatment, despite having less than 5% of the population. Sad case of devolve and forget, unfortunately, which does a disservice to my constituents in Delyn. Could the Prime Minister confirm that the UK Government remains concerned about the healthcare of the people in Wales? And given that the North Wales Health Board has had it for 8 years, could he come up with a way of putting the Welsh Labour Government into special measures?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, as the honourable gentleman highlights, the NHS right across our union is facing pressure because of some of the challenges of flu and COVID in particular, causing high bed occupancy this winter. We are focused on delivering on the people's priorities and bringing down the backlog. We've currently already eliminated waits of over 2 years, and as the honourable gentleman says, there's more to go. That's why our investment this week into mental health treatment will ensure that we can ease the pressure further in A&E, and I continue to delivering that across the country.
So Geoffrey Donaldson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I echo the comments of the Prime Minister in relation to Holocaust Memorial Day? And as we think of the situation in Ukraine, we also extend our best wishes to President Zelensky on his birthday today. Freedom of religion or belief is important in this country. Isabel von Spruce was praying silently outside an abortion clinic in Birmingham when she was arrested and questioned by the police, not about her written or spoken words, but about her thoughts. We value freedom of religion or belief in this country. Will the Prime Minister commit to examine the laws of the United Kingdom to ensure that this country remains a beacon for freedom of religion or belief across the world?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, of course, we believe in freedom of religious expression and belief in this country, but we also are balancing that with the rights of women to seek legal and safe abortions. That is currently being discussed in this Parliament. These matters are always matters of free vote, and I know members will treat them with the sensitivity that they deserve.
Dr. Liam Fox.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Innocent civilians are being murdered in Ukraine on Putin's orders as we speak. And as we see in a warmed House of Commons, families are freezing because their electricity is being cut off by Russian forces. Putin believes that Ukraine is more important to him than the free world and is moving to a full war footing. So the Ukrainians must make gains on the battlefield, and the next 6 months are crucial. They need a full range of weapons, Mr. Speaker, air defence, artillery, longer range missiles and tanks, and enough to make a real difference. The UK has shown great leadership on this issue. Can I ask, therefore, my right honourable friend to use every means at his disposal, domestic and international, to honour the courage of the people of Ukraine and to defend the whole world order, because ultimately that is what we're really talking about.
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I've made clear that the UK and our allies must accelerate our efforts to ensure Ukraine wins this war and secures a lasting peace. Last year, the United Kingdom provided £2.3 billion in military aid to Ukraine, the largest package of support of any European nation, and we will at least match that again this year. And as my right honourable friend knows, last week I announced that we would gift many battle tanks as part of the next major package of UK support to Ukraine, and I'm pleased that our friends and allies are preparing to follow our lead.
Dr. Rupa.
Mr. Speaker, London has it all: prime property, shopping, schools, even the perfect time zone for money laundering. And while there has been movement with Russian oligarchs, it's not just them. We know that there are relatives of regimes that we all condemn on both sides of this House that are running bogus Islamic centres just as fronts to stash their dirty cash, amongst other things. So when will the NCA be adequately financed so we can be a world leader in anti-corruption, as we promised in 2016? Or is there a lack of political will to upset the apple cart?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the honourable lady should know that we're currently in the process of legislating the Economic Crime Bill, which puts in place many more measures to allow us to tackle some of the issues that she raised, and also introduces the Economic Crime Levy, which will provide considerably more funding to tackle economic crime in the UK.
Sir McCartney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Trans-Pennine Rail upgrade is underway, which is good news, with stations in Slough and Marsden getting improvements. But what's not such good news, Mr. Speaker, is the dozens of daily rail service cancellations by Trans-Pennine Express, which is causing absolute misery for my constituents, trying to get to work, trying to get to college, trying to visit family and friends. The franchise is up in May, Mr. Speaker. So does the Prime Minister agree with me? Enough is enough. If Trans-Pennine Express don't get to grips with this, we need to strip them of the franchise and get somebody in who will deliver the reliable rail services for my constituents.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we have been clear that the current service is simply not acceptable. Rail North Partnership is working with a company on a service improvement plan, and my honourable friend, the Rail Minister, is having weekly meetings with them. As the honourable gentleman points out, Trans-Pennine Express contract does expire in May, and whilst there are currently discussions about that new contract, if ministers conclude that the operator cannot be turned around, then other decisions may be made.
Olivia Blake.
Mr. Speaker, from Rwanda to deaths in the Channel and the latest scandal of missing children, refugees and campaigners have today gathered outside Parliament to highlight the impact of the hostile environment on people in the migration and asylum system. Rather than cruel gimmicks like Rwanda, isn't the best way of deterring Channel crossings, saving lives and breaking the business model of criminal gangs to introduce safe and legal routes to claim asylum?
Well, Mr. Speaker, this just is about fairness. It's about fairness for those that seek to come here legally. It's about fairness for those who are here and our ability to integrate and support those who we want to. What we will do is break the cycle of criminal gangs, which are causing untold misery, leading to deaths in the Channel. And that's why we will introduce legislation that makes it clear that if you come here illegally, we will be able to detain you and swiftly remove you to a safe third country. That is the reasonable and common sense approach that the vast majority of the British public supports.
Sir Oliver Hill.
The Prime Minister will be aware of my concern that mental health patients should not be forced into accident and emergency departments when what they really need is specialist care. Can he say more about the extra money that's being made available for urgent mental health care facilities, and also what impact he thinks that will have, first on the treatment of mental health patients, but also on the general situation in A&E departments?
Prime Minister.
My right honourable friend is absolutely right. People in mental health crisis deserve compassionate care in a safe and appropriate setting, and too often they end up in A&E when they should be receiving specialist treatment elsewhere. This week's announcement is in mental health ambulances, crisis cafes, crisis houses, and mental health urgent treatment centres will make sure that patients do get the vital help they need whilst easing pressures on emergency departments and freeing up staff time. My right honourable friend is absolutely right to highlight this issue. Our announcement this week will make a major difference.
As a trustee of the Holocaust Memorial Day Trust, this week I was honoured to hear from Leah Lesser, a Holocaust survivor who came to this country by herself at the age of 8 because her parents believed that the UK was a safe haven for vulnerable children. This week I also read the government's own statistics which said that there are 200 asylum-seeking, unaccompanied children who are missing from hotels in the UK. Ministers have admitted that they have no idea about the whereabouts of these children. So could I ask the Prime Minister, does he still think that the UK is a safe haven for vulnerable children?
Mr. Speaker, the United Kingdom has opened up its hearts and homes to hundreds of thousands of people over the last few years, from Syria, from Afghanistan, from Ukraine, from Hong Kong, and provided refuge and sanctuary to many children in that process. But the reports that we have read about are concerning. Local authorities have a statutory duty to protect all children, regardless of where they go missing from. And in that situation, they work closely with the local agencies, including the police, to establish their whereabouts. And that's why it's so important that we end the use of hotels for unaccompanied asylum seekers and reduce pressure on the overall system. That's what our plans will do.
James Duddridge.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Constituents in Southend and Rochford very much welcome the energy bill support scheme that's helped 99% of households around the United Kingdom with rising fuel prices despite Putin's barbaric war in Ukraine. Can the Prime Minister assure my constituents and indeed this House that he's committed to continue helping with the cost of living, not only this winter, but next winter?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right about this government's commitment to support all families with the cost of living. This winter, around £900 of support. But next year, as the energy price guarantee evolves, it will still be there to support families with around £500 of support. And this comes on top of record increases in the national living wage, worth about £1,600, and supporting our pensioners and the most vulnerable by inflating their benefits and pensions with inflation.
Clive Atherton.
In 2021, the government enabled Yevgeny Prigozhin, former chef to Putin and founder of Wagner, to dodge UK sanctions to pursue a case in London against British journalist Elliot Higgins, who had exposed Prigozhin's link to Wagner. Prigozhin believed that silencing Higgins would get his sanctions lifted. The overriding of UK sanctions was approved by the Treasury when the Prime Minister was Chancellor. Prigozhin's English lawyers wrote that serving notice on Higgins, and I quote, will require Treasury approval. So what values did the Prime Minister apply when he allowed a Putin warlord to use our courts to try to silence a British journalist and undermine UK sanctions?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm proud of our record in leading, actually, when it comes to sanctioning those people connected with the Putin regime. I think at last count we've sanctioned over 1,000 people and frozen tens of billions of pounds of assets. I am aware of the case he's raised. We are looking at it. But there is, as he knows, OFSI, who deal with the licensing situations in these matters. But I'm happy to get back to him on the specific case that he raised.
Nicola Richards.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I echo my right honourable friend's comments on the importance of Holocaust Memorial Day and welcome his renewed commitment today regarding the Holocaust Memorial and Learning Centre. Will the Prime Minister join me in encouraging members from across the House to sign the Holocaust Educational Trust Book of Commitment, which will be in Parliament today and tomorrow, pledging to remember the Holocaust, fight anti-Semitism and to support the important work of the Holocaust Educational Trust?
Prime Minister.
I thank my honourable friend, and as I said earlier, we will legislate to help build the Holocaust Memorial and Learning Centre next to Parliament to serve as a powerful reminder of the Holocaust, its victims, and where prejudice can lead if unchallenged. I also join her in thanking the Holocaust Educational Trust for their fantastic work, and I join my honourable friend in encouraging all members to sign the Book of Commitment, as I will be doing later today.
And this Slaughter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A week ago, my constituent, Ali Reza Akbari, was executed by order of the regime in Iran. In the 3 years preceding and the days following his murder, the UK government made little effort to protect the life or protest the death of a British national. Tomorrow, Mr Akbari's family and I meet the Foreign Office Minister. They want to hear what help the government can offer them at this time of their greatest suffering. Today, this House wants to hear from the Prime Minister what sanction he will impose on the regime beyond the trifling steps taken so far. First and foremost, will he show some courage, follow the lead of the United States and the European Parliament, and prescribe the entire Revolutionary Guard Corps as a terrorist organisation?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the regime is prolonging the suffering of the family, and it is sadly typical of their disregard for basic human dignity. I've spoken before about my views in Iran when I was before the Liaison Committee, and Iran must now provide answers about the circumstances of his death and his burial. We have actually pressed the Iranian regime formally through their chargé d'affaires in London and the Foreign Ministry in Tehran, and will continue to do so until the family get the answers they deserve and have sanctioned several members connected with the case.
Redcliffe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Prime Minister and the Chancellor for visiting Hindman and Haslingden just last week to hear about the transformative difference that the Levelling Up funding will make. This is a historic investment with over £40 million secured. So does he agree with me that we're delivering it on exactly what was promised in 2019 to the areas that were forgotten the most, like Hindman and Haslingden? And will he visit once works are completed to see the difference himself?
Well, my honourable friend is a fantastic champion for her local community, and the result showed when the Chancellor and I were lucky to visit her last week. And as she pointed out, and as did many of the people that we spoke to, this was an area that had been forgotten, neglected for decades, but it's this government that is putting in the investment, spreading opportunity, making jobs, and making sure that people can feel enormously pride of the place that they call home.
Well, Sherman.
Mr. Speaker, does the Prime Minister realise that most people in my constituency think it's his role to keep our country safe? Yeah. Is he aware that in all those years I've been in Parliament, I have never heard a situation where our army and armed forces are so run down that the chairman of the Defence Select Committee and the Secretary of State for Defence both say our armed forces have been hollowed out and are unfit to put a division into active service? What's he going to do about that?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman seems to forget the fact that we've invested an extra £24 billion in our armed services. It's a record uplift in defence spending, ensures that we are one of the leading spenders on defence in NATO, and we will continue to ensure that we have one of the best equipped fighting forces anywhere in the world. And as we can see by the recent announcement on tanks, we continue to lead the world when it comes to standing up for not just our safety, but the safety of our allies around the world.
Sir Michael Penning.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And as a former firefighter, the whole House will pray for the firefighter that's fighting for his life in Scotland today. Our emergency services go one way into the danger while we come the other way, and our thoughts and prayers should be with them. On a separate note, Prime Minister, the Cornwall Borough Council, the Conservative-led council in my constituency, have done a fantastic job in building new houses, social housing and council houses. Can the Prime Minister assure me that we're not going to be pushed into green belt any more than we have already, and we can protect the Chilterns in my constituency?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman, and I join him in praising his local council for ensuring that we build homes in the right places and make sure that our young people can fulfil the dream of home ownership. But he's also right to say that this government will always protect our precious green spaces, and the recent changes to our planning reforms will ensure that we can protect the green belt everywhere, and his local community and others will benefit from those protections as we keep our local areas beautiful.
Martin Day.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. UK and a Changing Europe has reported that at the end of 2022, 60% of voters said their cost of living had increased, and 38% that their personal finances had been negatively affected from not being a member of the European Union. While OBR forecasts a 4% reduction in GDP, only 2/5 of which have already happened. Surely the Prime Minister would agree with me, with the electorate and the experts, that Brexit has only served to exacerbate cost of living and economic challenges facing these islands?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, Russia's illegal war in Ukraine and the impact it's had on energy supplies has nothing to do with Brexit, Mr. Speaker. But what we are doing is ensuring that we can support families with those cost of living pressures. That's why we provided £900 of support this winter with energy bills. That's why we're increasing the national living wage to record levels. And we will continue to stand behind Britain's families until we can bring inflation back down to where it belongs.
Virginia Crosby.
Mr. Speaker, I know the Prime Minister will share my concerns at the news this morning that 730 people may lose their jobs at the Two Sisters chicken factory in Llangefni, one of the largest employers on Ynys Môn. What support can the government offer to both my constituents who are affected by this devastating news and the wider community at this difficult time?
Mr. Speaker, I'm very sorry to hear about the job losses that the Honourable Lady raises. My thoughts are with those affected and their families. I know how distressing that will be for them. I'm pleased to say that DWP has procedures in place to support communities when situations like this arise, and we will work very closely with her to do what we are doing everywhere across the country, and that's provide good, well-paid jobs for everyone, because that is the best way to build a happy and secure life.
Caroline Paris.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Exercise is essential for both physical and mental well-being, but with spiral energy costs, many venues, like the Freedom Leisure Centres in my constituency, are struggling to cope. While some sectors will receive extra support, the sport and leisure industry will not. If the Prime Minister agrees with me that this sector is vital to the long-term health of our communities, why is his government not providing them with the financial support they need to thrive?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, of course I agree with the Honourable Lady that exercise and leisure centres are important, and that's why we provided significant support to them during COVID and beyond. And with regard to energy prices now, the Chancellor has set out the new relief scheme that will run after the current one expires. It provides considerable support to all sorts of organisations up and down the country, and I'm sure it will benefit many businesses and organisations in her constituency.
I understand that the case referred to by the Right Honourable Member for Lagan Valley is currently before the courts. It is therefore covered by the House's sub judice resolution and should not be referred to in this House. It is, of course, open to any member to ask I waive the resolution in particular case, but that has not happened in this case, and so therefore should not be discussed at all. I'm going to leave it at that. Right. Sends PMQs before I call the urgent question. Let me. Order. A point of order, is it related to the questions we've just had? Olivia Blake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Apologies, I forgot to refer the House to my register of interests for the support I received from the RAMP project and my APPG co-chairship of migration. Apologies.
Thank you. Right, let us move on to the urgent question. David Lammy.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. To ask the Minister if he will make a statement on reports that the UK government assisted the Wagner Group, head Evgeny Prigozhin, in circumventing the UK sanctions regime.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The war in Ukraine, as we all agree, is a barbaric, illegal incursion into a sovereign nation by another. It has resulted in tens of thousands of deaths, mass displacement and an ongoing humanitarian catastrophe. We will always stand up for our friends and allies, and we are proud to have led the world's response in partnership with our allies in supporting Ukraine in their fight against Putin's aggression. We'll deliver tanks to roll back any Russian advance, continue providing aid to help Ukrainians as they defend their homeland, and have unveiled the most stringent sanctions on any country at any time in our history. We want to use economic sanctions to starve Putin's war machine and put direct pressure on every individual involved in the decision to go to war and continue to make war on Ukraine. In response to the question lodged today, it is a long-standing custom that the government does not comment publicly on individual cases. It would not be appropriate to break this custom, even in a case as serious as this, where there is obviously public interest. However, I want to outline how, to date, the general approach taken by the Treasury's Office of Financial Sanctions Implementation, called OFSI, Mr. Speaker, in cases where persons designated under sanctions seek licences for legal fees, and how that has been followed for strong constitutional reasons. Within the sanctions regime broadly, because everyone has a right to legal representation, it is possible for frozen assets to be used to pay for that legal representation. The OFSI grant licences to allow sanctioned people to cover their own legal fees, provided that the costs are reasonable. To be absolutely clear, decisions on the issuance of licences for legal fees are largely taken by OFSI officials in line with standard practice. The principles and guidance for assessing these applications are long-standing and have been published for a number of years. Applications are assessed solely on a costs basis, and as a country with checks and balances, it is right that the relevant court should decide the outcome of the substantive merits of a case rather than the government. However, I can confirm, in light of recent cases and related to this question, the Treasury is now considering whether this approach is the right one, and if changes can be made without the Treasury assuming unacceptable legal risk and ensuring that we adhere to the rule of law. In advance of that, I know this entire House shares the same goal, to support Ukraine and see all of those behind the invasion punished for their complicity, and the government will continue to take a hard line on all those responsible.
Mr. Speaker, I think the whole House will be shocked at the evasiveness that we just saw from this minister, given the seriousness of this case. Mr. Speaker, for years, the Labour Party has been calling for the government to clean up London laundromat effectively and stop London homes being used as bitcoins for kleptocrats. For months, the opposition has stood shoulder to shoulder with the Foreign Office in coordinating sanctions against Putin and his inner circle. But yesterday, we found out that the Treasury, then under the leadership of the current Prime Minister, issued special licences that allowed Evgeny Prigozhin to circumvent sanctions issued before Putin's illegal invasion of Ukraine. The government appears to have granted a waiver for a warlord that enabled him to launch a legal attack on a British journalist. This is a perfect example of a slap lawsuit designed to silence critics through financial intimidation. Prigozhin is one of the most dangerous and notorious members of Putin's inner circle. The Wagner Group, which he leads, is responsible for appalling atrocities in Ukraine and around the world. If the now Prime Minister's Treasury had any hand in alleviating pressure on Prigozhin, I'm sure every member across this House would agree that this would be absolutely unconscionable. So I asked the Minister, and I asked him to answer these questions for the whole House. Did a Minister authorise the granting of a licence or exemption to Prigozhin? When did ministers become aware of this incident, and what actions have they taken? Will he commit today to an independent investigation of this controversy? Will he commit to urgently review the law regarding slap suits so that oligarchs and warmongers cannot bully and harass journalists and critics? And when will the government introduce restrictions on the provision of legal services to Russia, as the European Union already has?
Minister. Well, I am very grateful, the right honourable gentleman. It takes us back to our Ministry of Justice days when I was on the other side from him then. I'm not being evasive. I'm standing up in front of the House of Commons to answer the question, Mr. Speaker. And let me just start with the important point about, he's mentioned about the Prime Minister, who he's quite right was Chancellor of the Exchequer at the time. But therefore, let me just explain the process. I'm not going to comment on the individual case, but without prejudice to it, and talking about the general situation that pertains in terms of how Ofsted consider these cases, there is a delegated framework whereby decisions on legal fees for persons designated under the sanction regimes, all the sanction regimes, are routinely taken by senior civil servants. I want to be clear on that. We are not aware of any case of legal fees under any of the sanctions regimes being taken by a minister. I just want to be absolutely clear with the House on that. As to the point about SLAPs, and it's a really important one, and I was at the Ministry of Justice when this was a live issue. It was first raised in a backbench business committee debate by my Reverend friend for Holland Price and Howden in conjunction with the Right Honourable for Hodge Hill, and I responded to that debate for the Ministry of Justice. So let me just set out what we're doing. We have been clear as a government that SLAPs represent a clear abuse of the legal system as they rely upon threatening tactics to silence free speech advocates who act in the public interest. That's why it's often called lawfare, Mr. Speaker. We ran a call for evidence on strategic lawsuits against public participation and libel reform from March to May 2022 in light of reports that Russia and its allies may be funding litigation against free speech in the UK. We've published our response to the call for evidence on the 20th of July 2022, having closely analysed 120 responses from media, legal and civil society professionals, and we are committed to tackling SLAPs. I can confirm targeted anti-SLAP reforms will include a statutory definition of SLAPs, an early dismissal process and cost protection for SLAPs cases. The Government has committed to primary legislation to make these forms a reality as soon as parliamentary time allows.
Chair of the Select Committee,
Mr. Speaker, I understand that this was a decision made by civil servants, so therefore will my honourable friend commit to looking at whether we need to introduce ministerial oversight and how quickly that should be done. I am concerned that no civil servant thought that this might need political oversight or some sort of political intervention. That's gravely concerning. In addition to my first ask, will my honourable friend also look at the prescription of the Wagner Group? They are a state terrorist organisation responsible for war crimes around the world. And finally, I've been disappointed by the response to the government by my multiple written questions about the Wagner Group and the new centre they set up in Serbia, an enormous installation they've created because of the heinous activity we're seeing within the Balkans, and particularly activities around the illegal Republika Srpska Day that took place. So 1, please can we introduce ministerial oversight? 2, can we look at the Wagner Group in Serbia and put pressure on the Serbian government? And 3, can we finally prescribe this organisation?
Well, my honourable friend, the Chair of the Select Committee, speaks with great expertise on these matters. Of course, there are some points there which are for other departments to consider, but I will ensure that they're fed back. In terms of the specific point on the process in relation to Ofsted, I'm not going to comment on the individual case, but I think there is a general point about seeking clarification, and what I can confirm is we'll be undertaking an internal review to see how these kinds of cases are considered going forward, and we'll say more on this in due course.
SNP spokesperson Drew Hendry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Despite the Minister's gymnastics on this issue, it's clear that there are still serious and systemic links between the UK government and Russian political elites. In 2021, the operations, tactics and human rights abuses of the Wagner Group were well known. The EU and the UK imposed sanctions on Yevgeny Prigozhin as Wagner leader for this very reason. These revelations present a serious and immoral disregard for human rights obligations and due process at the heart of his government, and all on the current Prime Minister's watch, as he was Chancellor at the time. So will the Minister confirm what advice, legal or otherwise, prompted the Treasury to enable Prigozhin's activities in this matter? It is not beyond his capability, legally or otherwise, to tell us who made the decision to override that. And will the Minister confirm what actions his government will now take to ensure, as a result of these revelations, that the Prime Minister's promised integrity, professionalism and accountability at every level will be followed through?
Hear, hear. Well, grateful to the gentleman. I think he was he also submitted a similarly worded urgent question this morning, and I obviously respect that point. There's no gymnastics here. I'm just stating out what is the position. Just to be clear, he asked about any legal advice and so on. within the sanctions regime broadly, because we are a country with the rule of law and everyone does have a right to legal representation, it is possible for frozen assets to be used to pay for that legal representation. This is about sanctioned individuals. The Office of Financial Sanctions obviously grant licences to allow sanctioned people to cover their own legal fees, provided that the costs are reasonable. To be clear on this point, decisions on the issuance of licences for legal fees are not and should not be political and are largely taken by office officials in line with standard practice. And as I said a few moments ago, we are not aware of a case relating to illegal fees under any of the sanctions regimes where a minister took the decision.
David Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the Minister's assertion that there's going to be a review of this approach, but I ask him to make it quick, because even the Treasury's press release today indicates a level of misunderstanding by the officials, claiming a fundamental or absolute right to legal representation. Of course, you have right to representation if you're defending yourself in court. There is no fundamental right to use legal representation to destroy somebody else or shut down free speech.
Minister.
Well, I'm grateful to my right friend, and as he knows, I responded to his business today. He's been incredibly consistent in calling for actions on these points, and I very much respect that. I would just say that I do think that the right to legal representation is a fundamental tenet of our democracy, and that can mean that individuals and persons who we and I'm not commenting on the specific case, but it can mean that individual persons who we find distasteful therefore have a right to legal representation. Let's not forget, even at the Nuremberg trials, people who had committed the most heinous crimes in the history of the Western world were legally represented.
Dame Margaret Holmes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have to say, I've never seen such a case of lack of professionalism and lack of integrity and lack of accountability as this particular case. It absolutely astounded me. I thought it was unbelievable. And can I say to the Minister, it's not an isolated case in the way that these things are decided. There is the case of Petra Avon, who has been given a licence, and it is thought in the press that he's going to be able to spend up to £600,000 a year on so-called household expenses, which include buying and selling Bentley cars and other luxuries, which are just outrageous, so that by the time the sanctions stop, the resources, the sanctioned assets, would have disappeared. Can I also say to the Minister, I think this issue of individual confidentiality doesn't play here. No. The Foreign Office publishes a list of the names of the individuals, and I think we do have the right, therefore, to know what went wrong in this particular case, and he should report to Parliament. And I think, furthermore, I also welcome the fact that there is a review going on the way the Office regime goes, but that should be also reported to Parliament. And I think the third thing I would ask of him is that he gives a commitment that that general licence on legal fees will not be rolled over beyond when it expires on the 27th of April 2023.
Yeah, Minister.
I will also go to the Honourable Lady. I previously answered an urgent question on a matter relating to dividends in Russia, which she had tabled, and again, I respect the fact she's very consistent in a range of points that relate one way or another to this issue. What I would say to the Honourable Lady is, in relation to the specific case she mentioned, she knows I can't go into detail of it. I do think it's very important that we preserve that. There's all kinds of reasons for that point, and I suspect, and I may be wrong, but I think it would continue under any future government because there's very good reason for it. And for that's why we talk about the sanctions regime in aggregate rather than discussing individual confidential cases. And if we take the overview, the top overview, this country is doing everything possible, Mr. Speaker. We have a situation with Ukraine where we know that our position is that we are not directly deploying our armed forces into the theatre. So therefore, we have to use every other lever at our disposal, including sanctioning over 1,200 individuals and 120 entities, frozen the assets worth £18 billion. It is a very ambitious sanctions regime. We should be proud of what we're doing as a country to support Ukraine. We have played a key role in helping them to withstand the Russian invasion, but of course we recognise there is more to do.
Bob Seeley.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. I'm not going to talk about an individual case, and I know the government is doing, frankly, very good work on the Economic Crime Bill and the Bill of Rights, and certainly on this side of the House we all support that and recognise its importance. I want to talk specifically about the SLAPS primary legislation and where is it going to come. If SLAPS primary legislation comes in the Bill of Rights, as it's now been indicated to me that it is, and it's not going to be a separate law, it may limit the scope that we can do with SLAPS. So it may not cover all the stuff that needs to cover the SLAPS and, frankly, the lawyers who practice this, the slappers. So we need a separate primary legislation, a SLAPS bill. I introduced one yesterday. A best standard, gold standard practice SLAPS bill has been written for me, which the government can take or allow me to introduce, which covers a little bit of privilege, it covers the private investigator market, and it's broad enough to cover all the abusive practices in SLAPS, which will not be covered in the Bill of Rights. Will the government please consider this course of action as the most sensible case to ensure freedom of speech and a free media? Thank you.
Minister. Well, my old friend speaks with huge passion on these points. I think only yesterday he brought forward a 10-minute rule bill that relates to this area, obviously. He will appreciate there are issues around parliamentary timetable. That's above my pay grade. I feel very strongly that we've done as much as we can on SLAPS, but we want to go further. We need legislation. I said at the end of the backbench business debate, which of course he spoke in, that I'd heard what was said and we would now act, and the Ministry of Justice took forward that. We had the call for evidence, we've responded to it, but at the moment I'm afraid our position is that we will commit to primary legislation as soon as parliamentary time allows. I can't say more than that at this moment, but I'm aware of how strongly he feels on it.
Chris Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm sorry, this is so complacent, and the government has been systematically complacent about this issue of sanctioning individuals for the last 3 years. The Foreign Office wasn't prepared. It didn't have a proper sanctions regime in place. We're still only sanctioning 20% of the people who've been sanctioned by the United States of America. I have no idea why. And then we allow people to sidestep sanctioning. And what the Minister is saying today is he's basically endorsing what the Treasury Department, the Treasury did in relation to this particular case, which is a green light for them to do it again and again and again. Alicia Usmanov, for instance, is sidestepping it by a completely different process. It's time the government decided, as a whole, we are going to do this, we're going to do it properly. And frankly, I think we should listen much more to our backbenchers, because the whole of the House is united around this and the government is too complacent.
Minister. I have to say to the right honourable gentleman, he's wrong to say that I'm endorsing any particular action. I've been very, very clear that I'm not commenting on a specific case, Mr. Speaker, and what I have said is in relation to the general regime that pertains and is without prejudice to any specific case. And he says we weren't prepared. Well, Mr. Speaker, he may not be aware of Operation Orbital. We've been training Ukrainian soldiers since 2015. 22,000 Ukrainian soldiers. Well, I'm talking about Ukraine. I think that's the key issue here. And it shows that we were preparing for what happened, but obviously it was unprecedented when Ukraine invaded. But we are clear that our officials, departments, worked as fast as possible to bring forward an ambitious range of sanctions, which, of course, in March last year was when the Prime Minister was Chancellor, and they are having a significant impact on Russia and its economy.
Harriet Baldwin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And although we can't discuss a specific case, Wagner Group is written up on the Annunciator, and I wanted to add a further question about the regime that we are operating in within the Treasury, and I urge the Minister to go further than he committed to do in response to my honourable friend, the Chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee, because it's clearly such an evil organisation. What it is doing in Ukraine is so evil. What it's doing across North Africa is evil. Can he, from today, from the dispatch box, ask the OSFI officials to have a red flag system whereby anything related to the Wagner Group is flagged up individually to the Minister responsible?
Very good. Minister.
Well, my own friend's speaks with, obviously, the expertise of her position as chair of the Treasury Select Committee. I hear what she's saying. I've said that there will be this internal review, and she is more than welcome to write to me in her capacity as chair about that, and I will obviously reply in due course. But she makes the point that this is about the Wagner Group, but we're saying we're not commenting on the cases of specific individuals. But as a government, we're absolutely clear the Wagner Group is Russia-based private military company. It's organised the recruitment of and coordinated and planned operations for mercenaries participating in military operations in Ukraine. It is responsible for engaging in and provide support for actions which destabilise Ukraine and undermine or threaten the territorial integrity, sovereignty or independence of Ukraine, which is why the most important point is what are we doing to support Ukraine? And I just, as colleagues on the other side have mentioned the Prime Minister, let's talk about what he did when he was Chancellor. He was the one who put in place £2.3 billion of military support for Ukraine, which helped them to defend themselves against Russia, so that the fight is still being fought to this day.
Liam Byrne.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is outrageous. The Minister has just confessed to the House that sanctions implementation is out of ministerial control.
Yes.
And the result of that is that a waiver was issued for a warlord to sue an English journalist in an English court. Let's just be very clear about the sanctions indictment that this government issued on the 31st of November 2020. We sanctioned Prigozhin because he was operating, quote, a deniable military capability for the Russian state. 10 months later, civil servants under his control signed off £3,500 for business class flights, £320 for luxury accommodation at the Grand Hotel Europe Belmond, £150 for subsistence and more. Let's be very clear about what the leaked emails from that conversation show. They show that Prigozhin's lawyers wanted to sue Elliot Higgins and Bellingcat, I quote, because public rebuttal of the article is one of the reasons for his sanctions designation. He signed off money for a warlord to prosecute an English journalist in an English court to undermine the sanctions regime that he himself is responsible for. This is outrageous, and it's got to change, and it's got to change now.
Minister.
Well, the right honourable gentleman knows perfectly well that I did not in any way confess that ministers have no control over the sanctions regime. What I stated very clearly is that off-sea consideration of legal fees under the sanctions regimes, these decisions are routinely taken by senior civil servants under a delegated framework. That is simply a statement of fact. In relation to the claims for travel and other expenses, just to be clear, under the legal expenses derogation, officers are only permitted to issue a licence where the costs, including those relating to disbursements, have been deemed to be reasonable. Officers therefore scrutinise the hourly fees charged by fee earners, the hours incurred, and any other associated costs. It is the responsibility of the applicant to demonstrate to officers' satisfaction that this statutory reasonableness test is met, and if not satisfied, officers will not be able to issue a licence.
Sir John Martin.
Will my honourable friend agree that this is just the latest example of a dodgy Russian oligarch or similar using legal action attempting to shut down legitimate journalism? I strongly welcome what he has said about the government's intention to act against slaps, but will he first commit to publishing the detail of that legislation as soon as possible, and will he look for a means by which it can be introduced, preferably, as my honourable friend for Isle of Wight said, as a standalone bill. But if that is not possible, then to look to use other vehicles, possibly the human rights. The media bill might well provide a vehicle for acting to protect journalism, but we need this legislation as fast as possible.
Yeah, and I absolutely hear what my Roman friend is saying. He's another colleague who has spoken consistently on these points. He knows that when I was at Ministry of Justice, we acted quickly to bring forward measures in relation to slaps. First of all, the call for evidence, then our response. He will appreciate that the parliamentary timetable is above my pay grade, as it were, but I hear what he says, and I will ensure that the appropriate stakeholders in considering the passage of that legislation will respond to him. But in the meantime, I want to be clear, slaps is something where we do want to see progress.
Mr. Speaker, let's remind ourselves who we're actually talking about here. This is the head of the Wagner Group, responsible for egregious human rights abuses, not just in Ukraine, but in Mali, in Sudan, in Syria. Absolutely, they should be prescribed. They should be prescribed quickly. Today is President Zelensky's birthday. What a better gift we could give him. But on the review itself, that's going to take time. Can he assure the House that in the interim, a minister will look at every single case between now and then, until the regime is cleared up? And will he answer the question, will the results of this review come to this House so that we as parliamentarians can scrutinise? Because clearly, Treasury and the ministers have not been getting this right, have they?
Minister.
Well, I would say to the Honourable Lady, there are many ways at her disposal to scrutinise the government. As she knows, we have Treasury questions coming up, there's FCDO questions and so on. Very recently, we've held debates on Russia. We had the debate on Russian strategy. There have been a number of statutory instruments passed in relation to the sanctions regime. So in terms of scrutinising the government, I'm sure there will be many other opportunities. But as I say, we've only just recently taken the decision to hold this internal review, but I will say more on it in due course.
I'm sure all my constituents in Kettering would regard the Wagner Group as an evil organisation, and its activities in Ukraine, Middle East and Africa are absolutely abhorrent, and I'm sure they would support its prescription. In the meantime, can the Minister tell my constituents how many Russian individuals and entities have been sanctioned, what the value of those sanctions is, and the value of the economic sanctions that have been imposed against Russia?
Well, I totally agree with my honourable friend. Of course, we all agree about the nature of the Wagner Group. That isn't the point. But we do have to have a due process because of the right to legal representation. But what I say to my honourable friend, I believe that we've sanctioned around 1,200 individuals and 120 entities. And I believe latest figures show over £18 billion of Russian assets have been frozen by our sanctions, and 3/4 of foreign companies have reduced operations in Russia. Of course, we have no quarrel with the Russian people, because this will have an economic impact. But given, as I said earlier, that we are not taking a direct military posture in Ukraine itself, but doing everything else we can, it shows why we have to use every tool at our disposal, including a very strong economic sanctions package.
Holly Lynch.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Minister has spoken about it would be officials routinely taking these types of decisions, but I hope he would agree that we cannot ever allow for it to become routine to allow some of the very worst sanctioned individuals to weaponise British laws to go after British journalists. Now, he said that we're going to have a review, and as I think as he said, in light of recent cases. Can he confirm if he's looking into others?
Well, I said to the Honourable Lady, whilst I cannot comment on individual cases, I absolutely agree with her that we should be looking at lawfare. We will be bringing forward that legislation. I do think we have acted quickly on that, but of course it is a complex area of law that we need to get right. But she reinforces the point that many colleagues on all sides want to see that legislation come forward. I have very much noted that point.
Roman Chester.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With regards to the sanctions, what I do agree with the Minister on is this. Having been a former Minister for Sanctions, is the United Kingdom has led the world in taking firm, decisive, coordinated sanctions approach with our international partners to bring individuals to account with regards to what's going on in Ukraine. The question I have for the Minister specifically is this. This case highlights an issue with regards to granting of licences for legal fees. How many cases overall? We talk about the sanctions of over 1,000 individuals we've sanctioned. How many legal licenses have we granted the United Kingdom overall? With regards to the United States and UK and the EU, who we coordinate with regards to our sanctions approach, how many have they given? And with this case, was there any coordination input from our counterparts in the United States? And I do agree with the Chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee. It should be referred back to the Minister to make the decision rather than delegating it to an official as we move forward. And that review, what exact date are we looking at for that review?
Minister.
Well, I'm grateful for to my own friend and speaking with his expertise as a former sanctions minister. I just want to be, obviously I can't speak for the United States government, I can only speak for ours. I don't have the exact figures, I will look into that and will write to him, but I just want to make a general point. To be absolutely clear, I was stating a fact when I said that the decisions specifically on legal fees under the sanctions regimes are routinely taken by senior civil servants. I was clear on that. And I also said I was not aware of any case where the Minister had taken a decision. But under our Constitution, the reason why I am standing here is yes, because of course ministers are ultimately responsible for the department and for government policy. Nevertheless, it is entirely right to make a point about how these things work operationally, and as I said, yes, it is correct, it is a delegated framework for decision making.
Martin Docherty Hughes.
Mr. Speaker, it seems that this is yet the Wagner Group itself is just yet another addition to the litany of disaster that sustained what it seems is Londongrad. So can the Minister, on the back of this appalling situation, update the House when the British Government will not only introduce legislation on limited partnerships, but when his government will actually bring about the review that he talks about?
I'd say the Honourable talks about Londongrad. He knows we're taking extensive measures on economic crime. But I just want to say one thing to members of the Scottish National Party who come up every time and lecture us on the sanctions regime and so on. The greatest gift we could give to Putin would be for this country to engage in unilateral nuclear disarmament. Mr. Speaker, the most extraordinary position is to be lectured by the SNP on standing up to Russia, when if we took their advice and adopted their policy, we would undermine NATO and all our efforts to defend ourselves.
Sir James Duddridge.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Unfortunately, the government's response to the Wagner Group has been inadequate. I think in part because it falls between the FCDO and the Treasury. A number of colleagues in the chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee has called for that organisation to be proscribed. A number of others, and I have done so for different reasons, whether it's Serbia, Africa or a number of other conflict areas. Will the Minister bring together the two departments, look at prescribing the organisation and look at what impacts that will have for the efficiency of the sanctions regime?
Minister. Well, my honourable friend had considerable experience as Foreign Office Minister. He will be aware of how these things work. Absolutely happy to give that reply. I believe that that decision would be for the Foreign Office, but my honourable friend is right. We have to work cross-government, and I will write to him on that.
John Morrow.
Speaker, and as well as the Wagner's Group murderous activities in the Ukraine, as chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Africa, I am very aware of its activities across the continent. Mercenaries in Mali, Central Africa, the Republic of Mozambique and Libya. It is targeting civilians, it is actively spreading disinformation and propping up autocratic regimes, all to defend Putin's footprint and ambitions in the continent. So is the Minister saying that it is acceptable for someone to make money from these evil activities, be sanctioned, and then get a licence from the British government to evade those sanctions in order to defend themselves legally? And if that is what they're saying, or regardless of what he is saying, what message does that send to our allies across the world?
Minister. Of course we're not saying that. What we are saying is, whether we like it or not, there is a principle under democracy, under the rule of law, of the right to a defence. And therefore, we have a system in place under the sanctions regime to consider applications for legal fees to be paid for from frozen assets. That's the statement of fact of the position of how the system works.
Speaker, we are continuing to sidestep sanctions here. And it's absolutely disgraceful that the Minister continues to defend that at the dispatch box. What message does this send to Ukraine and our allies that our own Treasury is helping one of Putin's notorious warmongers evade sanctions? And if he can't tell us about the numbers of exemptions and waivers that have been given for individuals, can he find out and commit to coming to this House and publishing those numbers?
Well, the message we send to Ukraine is that this is a country that believes in the rule of law. It believes in democracy, and that's why we're supporting Ukraine. That's why the Prime Minister was in Ukraine recently confirming that we will do everything possible to support them, and why this country has made a greater contribution in supporting the brave people of Ukraine than any other country bar the United States.
I listen to them.
Very much, Mr. Speaker. I don't know if he's had the chance to read Oliver Bullock's book, Butler to the World. There's a copy in the library if he hasn't, and I would recommend it to him, because it lays clear Britain's role in facilitating this kind of lawfare that goes on. So Oliver Bullock has asked, what chance a British journalist got when even our own government is prepared to roll the pitch for oligarchs to sue us?
Minister.
Well, I just repeat the points I made earlier about the actions we are taking on SLAPs and the fact that we've already had the call for evidence and will be bringing forward primary legislation.
Andy Slaughter.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Is the government serious about tackling the use of slaps? Because threats of libel action by the Conservative Party chairman over his tax affairs, use of a non-disclosure agreement by the Justice Secretary to silence journalists, and the Home Secretary's attempt to stop the BBC reporting serious domestic violence by an agent of security services when she was Attorney General suggests they prefer concealment over transparency.
Minister?
Yes.
Clive Atherton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This approach that the government is taking, that case by case, they won't deal with specifics, just is an excuse to not to answer questions on specific examples that we raise in this House. And I know the bar is very high, but there can be few of Putin's allies, that, like Mr. Yevgeny Prigozhin, that are more notorious. And how can it be that the minister comes to the dispatch box and says, oh, the decisions were made by a civil servant, and there's no red flag put on the file of someone of this notoriety to say, speak to a minister? When are you going to get on and do the job you're put there for?
Minister.
The reason why we don't comment on individual cases is well established. I suspect it would be exactly the same under any other government, Mr. Speaker. Just to be clear, the UK sanctions regulations do not exclude payments for any particular legal services from that permission, and excluding such payments can give rise to issues about access to justice. Officers do not consider it appropriate for HM Treasury to effectively decide on whether a case has sufficient merit to be permitted to proceed by deciding whether to issue a licence permitting legal fees to be paid, and as such an approach would raise considerable legal concerns.
David?
The Minister has been asked now on a number of occasions, how many exceptions and waivers have there been over the last 2 years? The House is united. This is not a party political issue. We just demand him to come here and answer that question. And if he cannot do it now, then provide the House with details in writing.
I'm grateful, I did say to my honourable friend who's since left, the former Sanctions Minister, that I would be writing him, and I'll be happy to share that with other colleagues who've asked for what information we are able to publish. I will look into that and will then write to those colleagues who've raised that point.
Dave Dougan.
It's very difficult to believe, Mr. Speaker, that the regime exists just now where civil servants can make this decision, especially in the case of Yevgeny Prigozhin, where anybody with a passing relationship with a newspaper would have realised that enabling this to happen would have compromised their ministers and that they didn't have such discussions. So can the Minister assure us that he will review that? And I don't want to hang a civil servant out to dry, but somebody needs to take responsibility for this decision. And does he find it a coincidence that when one of the worst commercial war criminals came to find access to justice, he turned up in London?
Minister.
I was, as I said, Mr. Speaker, I've merely been stating the fact, and it is the case that these decisions are routinely taken by senior civil servants. But I also said we are ultimately responsible. We, as ministers, are accountable to Parliament, and that is why we will be conducting this internal review.
Owen Thompson.
Mr. Speaker, I'd be very grateful if the Minister could outline to us what is it about billionaire Russians like Yevgeny Prigozhin and others that make this government feel that they're so needy of special licences to be able to dodge sanctions.
Just to be clear, we don't make any of these decisions with prejudice to the legal case that the individual is pursuing. They do have a right under our law to have legal representation. What we have here is a process for considering applications to use frozen assets to fund legal fees in specific cases.
Final question, Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I recognise that the Minister has responded and tried to address the questions that have been put, and we recognise that government has at least made some of those efforts to do so. But the House, through the UQ today, has identified an anomaly. The anomaly is that the Wagner Group, who are, as everyone has said, are responsible for some of the worst brutal crimes across the Middle East and in Africa as well. Whenever it is identified and the House wants urgency, which I think is what we're all asking for today, can the Minister indicate the timescale for that to happen, when it will happen, and when the Wagner Group will find that the loophole they have identified can be closed?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is not a loophole in relation to the Wagner Group. We're clear, very clear on all of the issues about the Wagner Group, and of course we've acted against them in so much as they are part of the military effort in Ukraine, and we have supported Ukraine as far as we are able to in supporting that military effort. What we are talking about here is a very specific point, which is that there is a right to legal representation, and so therefore we have a process in place under the sanctions regime to consider applications to use frozen assets to fund legal fees. But as I said, we will be reflecting on that and reviewing that process.
That completes that urgent question. For those who need to leave, please do so before I start the next one. We come to urgent question. Kenny McCaskill.
Ask the Secretary of State if he'll make a statement on the levels of self-disconnection from power sources and on government support on energy bills.
Let's touch this space. Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I set out to the House on Monday, the government recognises the importance of protecting customers, including those who are on prepayment meters. And this weekend, the Secretary of State set out a 5-point plan on prepayment meters. He wrote to energy suppliers, calling on them to take every step to support consumers in difficulty, particularly those who are at risk of self-disconnection. And the government wants to see much greater efforts from suppliers to help consumers in payment difficulties, including offers of additional credit, debt forgiveness or debt advice. As the Honourable Member will be aware, Ofgem, as the independent regulator, is in the position to direct suppliers in a way that the government is not. The government understands that this is a difficult time for many families, and that's why we put in place unprecedented cost of living support. And it's easy, Mr. Speaker, to take that for granted, but it is so extensive, including the £400 discount under the Energy Bills Support Scheme, which have been appearing on electricity bills since the October bills arrived this winter, as well as the energy price guarantee, not needing any form of application process, directly subsidising energy bills for the typical family this winter to the tune of an additional £900 with equivalent support in Northern Ireland. The government is also committed to supporting those households without a relationship to a domestic energy supplier with a £400 discount under the Energy Bills Support Scheme alternative funding, with eligible households able to apply from the 27th of February. Now, it's critical that this support reaches consumers. That's why the government has also urged suppliers to take action on increasing the number of vouchers being redeemed under the government's energy support bill support scheme, and that's why we've published a list of supplier redemption rates. We want to encourage suppliers to compare themselves with their rivals and look to do as well as the best, showing who's meeting their responsibilities and who needs to do more. There are also established industry rules and processes to reduce the risk of self-disconnection. Suppliers are required to have conversations with their customers in arrears to set up a suitable debt repayment plan, taking account of their ability to pay. It's vital that these rules are followed. The Secretary of State wrote to Ofgem to ensure that they take a robust approach to compliance, and in response, Ofgem is reviewing supplier practice, and a key area of their review is on suppliers' approach to self-disconnection. But this is continuing work, Mr. Speaker. This afternoon I shall be meeting energy suppliers, Ofgem, Energy UK and Citizens Advice to make sure that they hear from the government and I can say for the honourable gentleman and all members of this House, the strong urge from this House to make sure that we do everything we can to protect those during this winter, most of all the most vulnerable.
Kenny McCaskill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A parliamentary answer on Tuesday disclosed that around 66,000 households in Scotland and 660,000 across Britain had self-disconnected from smart meters in Q3 of last year. Self-disconnection is that euphemism for being simply unable to afford to heat or power your home. Yeah. It's as pernicious as the phrase collateral damage is in war. Yeah. These afflicted by self-disconnection and all its misery are also civilians, but we are at peace, not war. Mm-hmm. These figures are for a quarter before prices rose and temperatures dropped. They're also only the tip of the iceberg, as the numbers are far greater, as these figures do not cover those on legacy prepayment meters. the numbers of which are substantial, almost 2 million in the UK and 300,000 in Scotland. They apply to those who operate before smart meters were brought in. They will substantially increase the numbers already so tragically afflicted. In an energy-rich country, fuel poverty is an obscenity. Given this heartless cruelty in cold winter, will the Minister now, firstly, forthwith end the forced installation of prepayment meters? Secondly, immediately abolish the perverse higher standing charges and tariffs for prepayment meters? And thirdly, as a matter of urgency, bring in a social tariff for the poorest and most vulnerable?
I thank the honourable gentleman for his question. He raises the issue quite rightly of those who are self-disconnecting and that situation. Well, I think we can be proud of the fact that I think the numbers of people who were physically disconnected from power and heat last year were literally in single figures. So the installation of the prepayment meters has to be an absolute last resort. But what we must, and we can be proud of and must insist that we don't have is a situation where people end up being physically disconnected from an energy supply. All suppliers are required to offer emergency credit when the meter runs out. And it's an important point to highlight, which should give consumers enough time to top up their meter. Traditional meters, which you referred to, have an automatic setting that allows for a set amount of emergency credit to be used after the customer is notified that the topped up credit has been used. As I've said, Mr. Deputy Speaker, we are absolutely committed to having the right regime in place. In 2009, there were issues then around the costs, the additional costs of prepayment meters, and at that time, Ofgem, then as now, who have the responsibility for supervising this, looked into that, and at that time they brought in a regime to make sure that any costs and charges had to be commensurate with the actual costs of delivery, though to a certain extent that has all been superseded by the energy price cap brought in by this government, which limits the amount that anyone can charge anyone for their energy.
Sir James Doddridge.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. It's excellent to have such a high-calibre minister in such a crucial role. Prime Minister's questions, I raised the issue of the energy bill support scheme that 99% of my constituents are helped with, but I'm interested in this report where worst performers and best performers are identified on the prepayment vouchers. Furthermore, the Minister said he's going to be meeting some of these people today. Will he name and shame and praise people on that list and try to get those right at the bottom, at least up to the median level, if not into the top quartile?
Minister.
Well, I thank my honourable friend for his kind words, and we are absolutely focused on that, and we all have a role to play in increasing awareness of the of these vouchers, which are so valuable to people, and we want to see more redeemed. The numbers are going up consistently. We have published the list of suppliers, and we've already brought them together so they can share best practice. But I wanted, by publishing the list, the House could see it, but also CEOs, I hope, will be talking to their teams about why they're lower down that list. And if we have all of them doing everything they can, and all of us in this House and across the voluntary and other sectors, local authorities, doing everything we can to raise awareness, we can lift the number of people who get that help to which they're entitled.
Opposition front bench, Alan Whitehead.
One way or another, there are over 3 million households on prepay meters. With the rapid rise in prices and the continued energy crisis, they're all now at risk of unseen disconnection because they simply can't afford the huge bills and constant top-up for their meters that they're faced with. Now, energy companies know this. They don't want to be saddled with account customers in distress. So we've seen 500,000 warrants obtained, particularly over the last year, 18% up on previous numbers, to drive customers in some trouble with their accounts into forcibly having prepaid meters installed in their homes, whether they want one or not. Customer disconnection is then not the problem for either the energy company or the government thereafter. And those customers on smart meters, by the way, the energy companies can simply change smart meter supply from credit to prepay without even a warrant being issued. So what is the government doing about all this? Polite letters is not enough. Will the Minister now be enforcing measures to ensure that energy companies stop issuing warrants or switching smart meters to prepay mode whilst prices remain high and the energy crisis continues? And what is the government actively doing to seek out and help those who self-disconnected forcibly and are now energy destitute? The government has said, and no doubt will say again today, that help is on its way in the form of government support for energy bills, yet precisely the range of customers most likely to be self-disconnecting are getting much less help than they should. We know, as the Minister has already said, that 30% of the vouchers in principle available to customers on prepaid meters remain unclaimed for a variety of reasons. And we know that the alternative help scheme devised for those indirectly paying bills, where they live in park homes, communal buildings or district heating schemes, has simply not arrived. It was expected in December, then in January, and now we hear it won't be active until the end of February, 5 months after account customers started to get their assistance. So what is the government doing to ensure that vouchers for prepaid customers really do get through to them, they are claimed, and that barriers to claiming are overcome? And why is the alternative help scheme so consistently delayed? Does the government just not care about help for those in park homes and other tenures, or are they just incompetent in organising that help in a timely way?
Those who know the honourable gentleman will know that he's normally better than that. And he knows, because we talk about it, just how hard we are working in the department precisely to make sure we get these things in place. We're proud of the fact that we got out to 29 million people. We got, on this unprecedented scale, the EBS discounts into people's bills. I make no apology for prioritising to get the bulk of that out there. What we then had to do is for the EBS alternative funding scheme, which sounds simple, but it isn't. It's a novel scheme with ambitious timescales. It's a complex cohort with a range of different energy arrangements, from off-grid, direct to commercial, and intermediaries. The Honourable Lady can chunter from the front bench, but she should recognise that the complexity and challenge in this. And when we looked at the February delivery for the portal, I, of course, again challenged it, and I met a few days ago with the 4 local authorities, the pilot local authorities who are working across Great Britain, all the devolved areas of GB, to talk to them about what the situation was. And we must make sure that we get all of those complexities sorted out, because they said that if we did not make sure that we get it right first time, it would actually delay payments to consumers. And my priority is to get the funding to people as quickly as it can. We have to make sure that people are not already receiving the main EBSS, because we've got to look after public money, that the bank account is verified and legitimate, and the individual lives at that address. And these records are held across government, local authorities and banks, requiring a complex case management system. Local authorities need to be able to access the system securely, requiring multi-factor authentication, and some local authorities don't have the ability to implement this quickly. So robust fraud checks are necessary when you have an application-based system. And inevitably for this particular group, an application-based system, there was no alternative to it. So each iteration of application process needs to be tested. And so I am confident that we will have that portal up by or on Monday the 27th of February, and we will make sure that, working with local authorities upon whom we rely, and I'd like to thank the 4 pilot authorities and other local authorities, we need to make sure their staff are trained up, that these complexities have been dealt with, they have a robust system, so that when people do apply, we can swiftly process those applications and make sure the families get that money, which they do so direly need. And I fully accept the point about the need for speed.
Selene Saxby.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I thank my honourable friend for his answer. This government has given huge support to businesses and households with their energy bills this winter, and whilst fully understanding the complexities of the situation with park homes, what reassurance can my honourable friend give to the multiple residents who have contacted me from Mill on the Mole near South Molton and Berrin Arbour Park near Ilfracombe that everything possible is being done to get their energy payment to them as rapidly as possible? And as MPs, we do know know where our park homes are. And if there's anything we can do to deliver this support locally, I would be more than happy to assist.
Minister.
Well, I thank my honourable friend, and she's right. She highlights that simply identifying where those are sounds like a relatively simple process. I hope I laid out in my last answer there are levels of complexity which have to be dealt with, and we're doing absolutely everything possible to ensure that this is done as quickly as possible, working with local authorities who are also in the very staff who will deal with this at the busiest time of year with their council tax bills, and we have to have a system which stands up, is robust and delivers on time. I have pushed back, as you might expect, in every way possible to see if we could have continued and opened the portal in January, but found we could not do so without risking the confidence and support of those local authorities. So we will make sure that we have it in place and we deliver it, in the right way. And my honourable friend, I know, who has quite rightly been making sure that my personal focus has remained on this for months, as she has reminded me of her constituents and their need for this help.
SNP spokesman Alan Brown.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Come April, there's going to be 8.4 million households in fuel poverty, almost a third of all households. So talk of capping bills at an average of £2,500 or £3,000 a year means absolutely nothing to these people who cannot afford to pay their bills or top up their meter. That's people in prepayment meters who are penalised with higher standing charges. People who, once they choose, are forced into not using energy, actually build up debt from these standing charges. Imagine getting into debt by not using your energy. And these are people more likely to have disabilities, more likely to suffer ill health, people who will die prematurely, people who are more likely to have mental health issues due to the struggles of their daily life. Now, I don't know what that kind of life's like, and I know for a fact the government certainly cannot claim they understand what that's like. So we need a proper social tariff now. Further energy support packages needed as a priority. Much more needs to be done in the redemption of these vouchers rather than just asking companies to publish data and government urging them to do more. We need to put in place a temporary ban and forced installation of prepayment meters. And Mr Deputy Speaker, isn't it a disgrace that energy-rich Scotland's union dividend is people unable to turn their gas on when Scotland's a net exporter of gas?
Minister.
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for his question. He said, what does any of this support has absolutely no meaning, I think was his phrase, or something close to it, for those people. Well, I'll tell you the meaning, Mr Deputy Speaker. The meaning is for those on benefits, there's been £800 of additional cost of living support. On top of that, the £400 EB support, and on top of that, £900 support coming and organised through the Treasury. This is real support, and to go for the kind of cheap rhetoric we've heard from the Scottish Nationalists, it might be typical, but even if it's typical, it's disappointing. And the honourable gentleman says that we need to do more than just urge the suppliers to do more, publish the transparency, urge it. I am all ears from the honourable gentleman for further ways to identify. We have an application that people have to take their vouchers and they have to use them. Any contribution the honourable gentleman would like to make as to how to build that, I am all ears, because it needs all of us. It needs the whole of society, and it needs families, it needs community groups, it needs MPs, it needs political parties to get the message out there to people that these vouchers are there. I'm confident they're being sent out by the suppliers. What we've got to do is encourage people to cash them in at a time when they need them most. And there's always a danger, Mr Deputy Speaker, that the people who need it most may be, we don't have the data, may be the ones least likely to use it. So he can try and make cheap points and shout at me from sedentary position, or he can engage seriously and properly in trying to do everything possible to get a system which collectively makes sure people get the help that they deserve. That's what I want. And if he has any practical steps which he thinks that we should be delivering immediately, that's it. And as far as social tariff for the future, we've said we will look at that going forward. We will look at how vulnerable people are looked after. We have to get it. We have to look at it in a considered manner. And I'm proud of the support the government has put in place. It stands up, I believe, internationally, and we're absolutely determined as we go forward to support people, particularly the most vulnerable, so they can suffer in a time of extreme energy stress.
Philip Holloburn.
Across the country and in the Kettering constituency, everyone should be benefiting from the energy price guarantee, which saves the average household £900 this winter on their bills. Everyone should be getting the £400 energy bill support scheme in £66 or £67 monthly payments, and those in band A to D households should have received a £150 council tax rebate. What extra is the government doing to the 8 million lowest income households, most of whom are on universal credit, pensioners and disabled people who are most likely to have need for prepayment meters?
Minister.
As my honourable friend will be aware, there's a series of programmes to support people in those positions, and £800 for all people on benefits, in addition to the sums which he has already itemised for the House.
John Trickett.
Speaker, and the Minister praised in aid the money which is being given to households across the country, and I acknowledge it's a significant amount of money, but it's not working, is it? There is one prepayment meter issued every 10 seconds. Millions of people living in fuel poverty, such as my constituent, disabled, trapped in his house, a prepayment meter imposed on him, but no voucher. He was left with in freezing cold conditions in the run-up to Christmas. It just isn't acceptable, and I'm afraid polite letters from the Secretary of State or cups of tea this afternoon with the Minister won't hack it. It's time they took legal powers to intervene directly in the energy market in order to protect the people of this country. Does he agree?
I don't think. I think that kind of crude socialist intervention in the market would be counterproductive, and it would be typical of measures that come from the party opposite, that they go in with high talk of helping the weakest and poorest, and they come up with policies that have the exact opposite effect.
Laura Brickcliffe.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and just following on from some of the questions regarding the £400 payment for park homes, whilst I understand the complexities, can the Minister set out, once this scheme goes live, how he's going to communicate with the residents of the park homes so that they do access the portal, but also will there be an alternative way to access the application process rather than just through an online portal?
Minister. Well, I thank my honourable friend for her extremely pertinent question. In terms of promotion, we will be promoting through a whole array of groups, and of course local authorities are key partners in this. We will be looking for the support of colleagues across the House, in local authorities, in the voluntary sector, as well as we have been doing, a larger scale public communications than the department's ever previously been engaging with. And in answer to her final question, yes, for those who are not easily able to access the government portal, there will be a telephone support service as well. But again, this will be an application-based system. We will not get to 100%, but I hope we can work constructively, and all ideas welcome to do everything we can to maximise the take-up and make sure people get the support to which they're entitled.
Munira Wilson.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. My constituents living in houseboats and on heat networks have been left out in the cold for months without support or information. This is despite repeated assurances from the Minister that the vital £400 they were promised of the Energy Bill Relief Scheme alternative funding, applications for that were promised to be opened by the end of January. Yet yesterday, in a private briefing for members, the Minister revealed that the earliest the applications will be open is end February, with money not coming through until the end of March. Yet yesterday he also replied to a written question in writing to a member of this House that it was still going to open in January. So does the Minister accept that his answers to members of this House have been misleading, and that he has broken promises to off-grid customers? And what on earth is he doing to ensure that my constituents and people up and down this country get the support they need in the freezing cold right now?
Minister.
Well, I thank the honourable lady for her question. I think she'll find the letter stated that the government had said that scheme, we'd announced that the scheme would open in January, which was true. We did announce that we aim to open it in January. The pilot has an engagement with local authorities has shown that we need to delay that to February, and therefore I organised briefings yesterday afternoon for all members of this House to make sure that they heard about that, and seeking to notify the House as quickly as possible by writing to the Select Committee Chairman and others to let them know. So we are doing everything possible to make sure that we have a robust system in place. I set out that this is a novel system, it's complex, and it does rely on local authorities, and it was after personally meeting the representatives of those pilot local authorities that I came to the decision that the right thing to do to ensure speedy delivery to her houseboat owners, amongst others, of this support would be in place. It's also worth noting, though, of course, they have seen support through the, if they come through a commercial supply through the Energy Bills Relief Scheme on electricity, but I want to see them get their £400 as well, and I want them with a system which works, is effective and as quick as possible.
Hilary Benn.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr Deputy Speaker. The Minister appeared to say, in answer to an earlier question, that no one should be physically disconnected from their energy supply. Now, if I heard that correctly, and if that is indeed the government's position, does that extend to people on prepayment meters who cannot connect themselves to their energy supply because they simply don't have the money to top up the meter? Because if that is the case, then I would be interested to hear what further action the Minister is going to take to prevent that happening in all cases.
Minister.
Well, I thank the right honourable gentleman for his question. No, the point about a physical disconnection, and I think there may have been only one in the United Kingdom last year, is that differs from the prepayment meter, means that no matter what pre-existing debt someone may have, by having a prepayment meter, as soon as they do have money to put credit on, then they can recommence their energy supply. So the physical point is when they are literally cut off, and they will have to reapply and get it brought back, which is an alternative which I absolutely don't want to see. And if we didn't have a system which, as an absolute last resort, for those who run up large energy bills, do not engage with the supplier, are not showing any sign that they're going to pay, they must be able to do something. And the prepayment meter installation, if absolutely necessary, as a last resort, under warrant, if they won't engage any other way, means that that household still has access as long as they put some credit on, and that is a lot better than bailiffs and a total physical cut-off. And I think we can be proud of the fact that we don't have people cut off from energy supply, although, admittedly, as the right honourable member says, they have to put money onto the meter in order to be able to access it.
Alison Tholis.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. And I've had many emails from people who live in Dalmarnock and are served by a communal heating system operated by Switch 2. That is not currently under government regulation at the moment, and they have received a letter informing them that the price per kilowatt hour is going from 11 pence to 32 pence, with also standing charges in addition to that. So can you tell me what support can these people expect from the government? Because at the moment, with the lack of legislation and the lack of eligibility to other schemes, they are left simply with heating that they can't afford.
Minister. Well, I thank the honourable lady for her question, and if she was happy to follow up with some details of that, I will happily write to her and come back on the specific points that she's raised.
Stephen Darty.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I do genuinely appreciate the Minister coming to meet with us yesterday to discuss these issues, but he will have seen the shock and disbelief in the room when he made the announcement he did, not least as he wrote to me just last week saying that the scheme would open in January, and I've been asking him about this since October on behalf of residents in Sully and my constituency who are affected. There's nearly 1 million people across the country, as he well knows, who haven't had any form of support in lots of different types of building. Can he be absolutely clear, when that portal opens on the 27th, how long will it take for them to get the payments? Are we talking about a month? Are we talking about 2 months? Are we talking about them waiting until the summer? What advice does he give to those people in the interim? Should they allow debt to build up? Should they turn off their heating? What should they actually do? And what should the management companies do, particularly in communal buildings, who are potentially owing significant amounts with residents having not paid bills to them? What's his advice to them?
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman, and I thank him for turning up at the meeting yesterday. I mean, the decision was made yesterday, and I was able to brief colleagues, including the honourable gentleman, yesterday afternoon. So tried to move as quickly as possible. And, of course, until a decision is made, government policy stays as it is until it is changed. So that would explain the letter. And then, certainly, and I hope the honourable lady would accept it, I was not being disingenuous. We moved to communicate it as quickly as the decision had been made. It will go through local authorities, so much as I would love to give an absolute defined date, it depends when people apply, and we will be encouraging people from the 27th of February, if that is when it launches, onwards to apply, and then local authorities will be carrying out their bit of verification. We will triage it first so as to minimise the imposition on them, but they will then have to go through a process and get the payment out, which means I cannot give a definitive date, much as I would like to, and much as I can see he's quite right to suggest it would be a benefit to people to know when they were going to get the support to which they're entitled, but I hope he would understand administratively, if I gave a date, there would just be a risk that I'd be back before the House again explaining why in some cases it wasn't delivered. So we will do so as quickly as we can, and having talked to the pilot local authorities, they feel we're taking the most robust approach with the best chance of getting it out as quickly as possible.
Alistair Carmichael.
Deputy Speaker, for those who are getting support for alternative fuels, what reach does he expect the scheme to have for those that the government have identified as relying on alternative fuels, and how long does he expect it will take for the remainder to get their money?
Well, I thank the right honourable gentleman for his question. Those for alternative fuels who are in the majority group, and following this, I haven't seen, it might be where we're at in our data development. I haven't seen a number on that. If I can access that, not only I will write to the right honourable gentleman, I'll also seek to find a way of sharing it with the House so they can see that. But most people will be paid automatically with a credit to their energy bill, which will be ready in the beginning of February. That may, I suppose, not appear on the bill until March. But we will have that up and running to happen automatically for those with an energy bill, and we hope to open the same portal that is being used for the EBS £400 would be used for the alternative payment of the alternative fuel payment, and hope that would open very shortly after the opening of the EBS alternative payment, portal. And when I have further and specific dates I can share, I will do so.
Mike Amesbury.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I have a number of constituents get in touch with me from, it's called Castle View House. It's a number of flats which are sub-metered, absolutely desperate at the moment. They have been for some time for payments to get through the door. Again, share this with honourable members and right honourable members right across the House, many in Park Homes. What guarantee, because I wasn't at all convinced by the Minister's answer, that the portal will be open on the 27th of February and this scheme will be in operation?
Minister.
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for his question. He's quite right to highlight whether it's the residents of Castle View House or the Park Home residents in his constituency, all of whom are waiting to hear and expecting to hear that they're going to get the support to which they're entitled. I am confident that we will have it open on or by the 27th of February, and I and my teams will be doing absolutely everything to make sure that happens. We're working through local authorities. It is about making sure that we have all the procedures, some of which I touched on, properly worked through, and that we have local authority staff trained up as well in order that they can then process this. I'm afraid that's as far as I can go right now. This is a novel system. Those who are working in the local authorities and council tax are used to collecting money in rather than putting it out, but we are doing everything we can, and I'm so grateful for the work of local authorities at a really busy time and the commitment they've shown in Wales, Scotland and England to try and make sure that this is delivered.
Daisy Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Up to 170 Park Home households in Frogmore Park, Newlands, Highview and other areas in my constituency are still waiting for their £400 energy support payment. I first raised this issue with the Minister about my Park Homes 7 months ago, and it was only last night, by chance, that we discovered that the scheme would not be open by the end of this month. There are freezing temperatures this week. We cannot wait another month for the government to get around to organising how to set up a portal which won't then release the funds for much, much longer. I suggested to the Minister last night that he immediately empowers local authorities to distribute emergency funds to these households. Will he do that today?
Yeah.
Minister.
Well, just say to the honourable lady, and I thank her for her question. She has passionately espouse the interest of her constituents over, as she says, a considerable time, and I share and understand her frustration. She didn't find this out by chance yesterday. It wasn't a briefing with me, which was arranged for members from right across the House. And as I've said, I'm absolutely focused on making sure this portal does open on or before Monday the 27th, and that we then get the money out to those who are entitled to it, with the due protections of public money, as well as a focus on delivery for them.
Hal Williams.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Wales has a smaller population than Scotland. However, the number of smart meters disconnected in Wales is consistently higher. In Q3 last year, it was 75,000 disconnected in Wales as compared to 66,000 in Scotland. Q2 is 80,000 as compared to 69. Q1 last year, 60,000 in Wales disconnected as compared to 50,000 in Scotland. And I'm indebted to my honourable friend from East Lothian for enlightening me as to these figures, what they are. Perhaps the Minister can also enlighten me as to why they are like this.
What I can say to the honourable gentleman is that I'm meeting the suppliers this afternoon, and I will be pressuring them and continuing to talk to them about making sure that they do everything possible to support people, provide them with emergency credit, provide them with repayment programmes, everything possible to avert getting in a position where they have to have forcible implementation of prepayment meters, and to look after those and make sure that those who are on them are in a position where they can continue to access their heat and their light.
Anne McLaughlin.
Mr Deputy Speaker, next week I'm launching the All-Party Parliamentary Group on prepayment meters, and one of the first things we'll be looking at is so-called self-disconnection. Now, given that I wrote to the Secretary of State in September expressing my concerns about this, and I have received zero response, and given that the Government has twice tried to block my bill seeking to outlaw so-called self-disconnection, and given that I've had no response from BEIS to my debate in here on more general issues around prepayment meters last December, which was supported across the House, can I ask the Secretary of State to make a commitment today that he will meet with the APPG as a matter of urgency, because we've been waiting long enough, and he can use terms like physical disconnection all he likes, but the impact is the same. If you can't access gas and electricity, you're stuck. And last year, 2022, every 10 seconds, somebody on a prepayment meter was disconnected from their energy supply.
Minister.
Well, thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I pay tribute to the honourable lady for her focus on and proper championing of this issue, and I'm not the Secretary of State, but as the Minister for Energy and Climate, I will instruct my office to reach out to hers, and we'll try and set up a meeting with the APPG sooner rather than later.
Holly Lynch.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. I don't think the Minister's in any doubt about the strength of feeling of disappointment that we're going to have to go back to our constituents, who we've only shared his own words with them, that they're expecting the alternative fund at the end of last year, then in December, and we're going to have to disappoint them again that it's not coming in January. He's talked about capacity issues in local authorities as being part of the delay for rolling this out. What consideration has he made to supporting local authorities with additional resources so that we can roll this out faster? I shared with him yesterday, I've got a member of police staff telling me she cannot afford to put a heating on. We need to make sure that people, including dedicated public servants, can stay warm. How can we get this rolled out?
Well, I thank the honourable lady. I don't think I identified capacity issues as such. It's more about a set of complex issues which need to be resolved, and then, having resolved them, providing suitable guidance for local authorities so that they are in a position to do it. Though I did say that it is challenging times for them because they're also doing counterattacks. But what I'm not hearing from them is saying that there's some quick fix. You need people who are trained to be able to use the systems already, and it's through those systems that we're able to do the work to ensure that this goes out. So we are working with them, we're working with the pilots, and I'm really grateful for the work they're doing in helping shape the system, and then the guidance which will go to all the other local authorities around the country.
Drew Hendry.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. The Minister must realise that promises of reviews by Ofgem into the activities of energy companies will come far too late for people who are struggling now to pay their bills and indeed can't even get anywhere near it. I'm already waiting for a promised meeting with ministers about the malpractice of overpayments and being routinely kept by energy companies of consumers' money, and direct debits being shot up well above their level that they should be. So the minister has the power to turn up the heat on Ofgem. Will he do it?
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman. I meet regularly with Ofgem, and indeed we'll be meeting with them again this afternoon. And that's precisely the kind of conversations we do have. And they are working hard on coming down on the suppliers. They've looked into making sure that they don't build up unjustified credits, the suppliers. But I hear what the honourable gentleman says, and it is Ofgem's role as that independent regulator to supervise, regulate and ensure that the licence conditions under which suppliers operate are fulfilled, and we are doing everything possible to make sure that, in a sense, we hold their feet to the fire while they hold the suppliers' feet to the fire.
Helen Morgan.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. People who are living in marinas, on houseboats, and who are sub-metered, and in my constituency who are often also off the gas grid, are not only using a prepayment card, so self-disconnecting when they can't afford their energy, they're being charged a pass-through commercial rate, often with the 20% VAT added on. They haven't had help for their heating, they haven't had help for their electricity, and they're self-disconnecting. Does the Minister accept that some money in the spring, when they've gone through this terrible cold winter already, is just too late for them?
Well, I share the frustration of the honourable lady, and obviously we would like that to have got to them sooner, but I've laid out the reasons. What they will have if they are supplied their electricity through a commercial supply, then of course the EBRS has been directly reducing those bills through that commercial supply, which would then, and we've put in place legislation to require the passing on of those government interventions to the end recipients.
Jonathan Edwards.
Mr Deputy Speaker, he mentioned in his initial reply the energy price guarantee, which of course has been extended until March 2024 for gas customers. There has, however, been no further announcement for those who use alternative fuels to heat their homes, oil, LPG, wood pellets. Can you give the House assurances that he will be putting pressure on the Treasury to bring forward an announcement for those households who use alternative fuels for next winter?
Minister.
What I can assure the honourable gentleman is that we will be looking carefully at the cost pressures across different markets, as we did when we came up with the alternative fuel payment, which originally was £100 and we doubled to £200, and I know is making a difference in Northern Ireland and will make a difference in rural areas around the UK.
Jim Shannon.
You, Mr Deputy Speaker, can I thank the Government and the Minister very much for all the help that they've been able to give businesses and householders. It is much appreciated, and we need to put that on record. Just this morning I've had a number of businesses back home and where the Minister visited just last week in Newton Ards Town, who have informed me that that they're seeking support for small businesses who they've said they've turned their lights off. They say they're supplying staff thermals to keep warm. They can't afford the current prices, and some of them have informed me that they're facing bankruptcy. Can I ask the Minister this question? Would the Minister consider a small business relief fund that can be applied for businesses throughout the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland?
Minister.
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman. It was a pleasure to see him in his constituency last week, and while I was there, meet with community organisations, including the Consumer Council, who hosted it for us there, and learn about the situation of people in Northern Ireland struggling with their energy bills. He's right to highlight businesses and others struggling. That's why we brought in the EBRS, and that's why we're going to have the Energy Bills Discount Scheme going on from April, and we will keep that under advisement. But for those many, of course, companies in Northern Ireland, more than the rest of the UK, use alternative fuels, and we are again working on making sure that there is support put in place as soon as we can. But again, because of the nature of that, there is no central database of it. We've got to manage the public funds. It sounds simple. If I was in opposition, I'd probably shout at the government to get it because it sounds so easy. It turns out it's complex, but we are working as hard as we can to get those schemes in place a place where energy is actually devolved, and we shouldn't have any responsibility at all, but we've stepped up because we've had to. We'll continue to do so in this particular area, but I very much hope to see the institutions restored in Northern Ireland, the Northern Irish people served by the people they elect there.
Finally, Patrick Grady.
Deputy Speaker, there really can't be any justification for the premium charges that are associated with prepayment meters. And the energy companies are getting cash up front from customers before any energy is used. As I said to the Minister on Monday, they must be able to bank that and earn interest on it, as indeed people who accumulate credit balances who normally pay by arrears. So perhaps he can raise this point with the companies when he meets them this afternoon, and he can let us know their response in the letter that he also promised me on Monday.
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for his question. I say Ofgem are responsible for regulating this area. The last, as I understand it, they looked into it in 2009 and made some changes then, and they required suppliers only to make charges which were cost reflective. So they have genuinely to be based on the additional costs of delivery, though to a certain extent that has been obviated by the energy price cap, which has put a tariff limit on what any company can charge. But I will make sure that I get a letter to him on this topic.
Thank you, Minister. Order. Members leaving the chamber, please do so quickly and quietly. Presentation of Bill. Richard Ford.
National Parks Camping Bill.
Second reading what day?
Friday the 24th of March.
Friday the 24th of March. Presentation Bill. Richard Burke.
Thank you. General Election Public Support Bill.
Second reading what day?
Friday the 17th of March.
Friday the 17th of March. Now come to the 10-minute rule motion. Dean Russell.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I beg to move that leave be given to bring in a bill to make mental health first aid part of first aid training requirements and for connected purposes. This is my second attempt to bring this bill to the House, and as before in this speech, I will be speaking about the sensitive topics of mental health and suicide. I will share the scale of public support through the Excellent Where's Your Head At campaign, and I will outline the economic and business benefits. And I will also share why this bill will bring hope to those who are struggling to cope in times of difficulty. Ultimately, at the heart of this bill is a simple request: to create parity between mental health and physical health in the workplace for first aid. Mr Deputy Speaker, there is no doubting the world has changed, not only in the post-COVID era, but the rise in technology, to the relentlessness of social media and an always-on culture. Our working environments are shifting rapidly, but we, as humans, have not changed. We still have emotions. We still feel love and loss, happiness and grief, joy and pain. We have goals and ambitions, hopes and expectations. Sometimes they can be overwhelming, and at times we can find it hard to express how we feel, and when feeling vulnerable, may find it hard to know who to speak to when times are tough. In my previous attempt to bring this bill forward, I spoke about the impact of hearing my sister sob when I was a teenager, when she heard the news of one of her friends who had death by suicide. So to frame the importance of this bill, I would ask those listening to think for a moment, please, about someone they may have lost in their own lives. What would we all give to hold a loved one's hand just one more time, to hear them knock at the door just once more, to have just one more conversation? What would we give to have that loved one here today? And as I've said before, if suicide were a virus, we would be on the hunt for a vaccine. And if loneliness were a disease, would we not search for a cure? And at the extreme end of this bill, we are talking about saving lives. The House of Commons Library reports that in 2021 alone, there were 6,319 deaths by suicide that were registered in Great Britain. Although suicide rates have declined over recent decades, and thankfully the 20th century stigma around shame and around mental health has shifted, but there is still more to be done. That is why I'm also backing a new charity campaign, the Baton of Hope, who are part of a growing movement aspiring to a zero suicide society. But achieving this won't be easy, and of course we cannot bring back those we have lost. But through early intervention and ensuring the right signposting at the right time through this bill, we could possibly prevent losing others in the future. But this bill is not just about preventing suicide, as important as that is. It's also about reflecting the reality of modern society, especially post-COVID. There is no doubting that mental health issues are on the rise. Stress, depression or anxiety have increasingly become the leading cause of lost workdays since the 1990s. Let me share some data. Firstly, the Centre for Mental Health estimates that 10 million more people will need mental health support as a direct result of the pandemic. This growing need was reflected perhaps this week most strongly when it announced that £150 million of additional funding for mental health services are going back into the system. And I was pleased that Watford General Hospital in my own constituency received £355,000 for mental health services to support my constituents and those across West Hertfordshire. And according to the British Safety Council and the Health and Safety Executive, nearly 1 million workers who suffer work-related stress, depression or anxiety will lose an average of 18.6 days a year. And that is in the context of 17 million days lost due to poor mental health in 2021 and 2022. This brings me to the all-important business benefits of this bill. According to Deloitte, the Deloitte Mental Health at Work Report 2022, the cost of mental health to UK businesses is staggering, £56 billion per year. And according to Goodshape, a business in my own constituency that partner with leading organisations to track and improve the well-being of staff, 54% of workers who take more than two days leave due to mental health-related absences will go on to leave their jobs. The Deloitte report also indicated that a return on investment for investing in staff is well spent, with £5 to every £1 spent. So it cannot be argued any investment is not worthwhile. A pre-pandemic report also indicated that a new thing called presenteeism, where employees are physically at work but not productive, was also costing UK employers up to £29 billion per year. And where presenteeism relates to mental health, it can have a detrimental impact on more detrimental than absences. So ensuring mental health is firmly on the business agenda is not a burden, but it's an investment which ultimately benefits their bottom line. And there is real public support too, thanks to the work of Where's Your Head At with Natasha Devon, for which I am proud to be an official ambassador. Over 200,000 people have signed a petition supporting the principles behind this bill, which was from way before I joined Parliament. And I've seen the benefits directly myself too. In my own constituency of Watford, I set an ambition to train 1,000 people in mental health first aid awareness, which I originally anticipated would probably take about a decade to achieve. And incredibly, we've just reached the 600th person trained by that programme, thanks to the incredible support of Camelot and the Watford and West Herts Chamber of Commerce. There are many more trained locally through other schemes too, and that's because there are now many more providers of mental health first aid and mental health first aid awareness training. And from those like the Mental Health First Aid England group who helped with some insights for my speech today, there are many other courses, including free courses by government departments, which are available to many. So I would not seek to limit the options or be too prescriptive with this speech. That is because workplaces are diverse, from offices to hair salons, construction sites to supermarkets. Each worker is different. Behind every statistic is a person with family and friends. They are our mothers, our brothers, our sisters, and our fathers. They are the veterans and they are the volunteers. That is why I believe the power in this bill lies in making sure that it's flexible enough to work for all. We spend so much time in the workplace, yet we cannot always be ourselves when we are there. It can be hard to show our true face when times are tough because we aim, as always, to be professional. But people do not wear bandages to show where they have anxiety and depression. Many learn to hide their pain in fear of damaging their careers. For many, they learn to smile when really they would like to run a mile to escape the situation they might find themselves in. Mental health first aiders, I must be clear, are not expected to be counsellors or psychologists, but just like physical first aiders, who are not expected to be paramedics or surgeons. This bill will simply mean workers have someone to signpost them to the support and help they need when they need it. So before I come to my conclusion, I would just like to take this short opportunity to say to anyone listening to this speech who may be having difficulties right now, that tough times can pass, that sometimes the mind can be a cruel echo chamber full of unwanted thoughts and hurt, and speaking can be a powerful release valve, reducing the pressure and the stress. So please ask for help if you need it. It is not a weakness to ask for help. It is a strength. And to my right honourable friend on the front bench, I truly hope the government will also have the strength to back this bill. So yes, I am back for a second time. Unfortunately, I'd never give up, and I will not give up on this bill. But even if I did, there are so many more behind me who would want to make this happen. So this is not a request that will go away, and I will be back again if needed. This bill is a small change with a massive impact, so I humbly request that this bill be given due consideration and is passed into law.
Question is that the honourable gentleman have leave to bring in the bill. As many of that opinion say aye. Contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. Who will prepare and bring in the bill?
Dean Russell, Andy Carter, Jonathan Gullis, Jim Shannon, Virginia Crosby, Dr Neil Hudson, Nick Fletcher, Leah Nietzsche, Siobhan Bailey, Sarah Atherton, David Dugoid, and Debbie Abrahams.
Dean Russell.
First Aid Mental Health Bill.
Second reading what day?
The 24th of February.
The 24th of February. Order. Clerk will now proceed to read the orders of the day.
Economic Crime and Corporate Transparency Bill, as amended in committee, to be further considered.
We commence today with Government New Clause 14, with which...
What distinguishes Broadcasting Scotland from a website or blog, apart from our brilliant programmes?
Hi there, I'm Gordon Ross.
Are the costs we face to enable us to produce those programmes. These costs are significant and ongoing. However, our facilities are able to do so much more if only we had the staff. In the last year, some of our supporters have cancelled their subscriptions. In one way, we would prefer it if it was because they didn't like us, rather than it being because of the financial pressures which we are all under because of COVID. The really positive outcome of our fundraiser is that at a time of economic challenge in Scotland, we will use your donations to create jobs and in a small way contribute to improving the Scottish economy. If you want us to be Scotland's independent broadcaster, able to provide an alternative mainstream television platform, then please support us.
Scotland is going to be an independent country.
Just imagine what we could do if we had even 1% of the BBC Scotland channel's budget. Imagine. And then please consider turning your imagination into reality. Please support us if you can afford it.